My name is Calliope Holland, and I am 29 years old. On a brisk Thursday afternoon in early December, I stood in the grand atrium of Aura Alpine, the most exclusive wellness resort in Aspen, and listened to my own mother tell a room full of wealthy socialites that I had likely sneaked in through the delivery entrance. For 3 months, I had curated this family retreat. I arranged the flights, I booked the suites. I did it because my mother, Diana, insisted it was time we finally bonded as adults. Instead, she handed me the valet tickets the moment we pulled up to the stone portico, told me to make sure the staff did not scratch her hard-shell luggage, and then downgraded my room to a standard double next to the service elevator so she could use my suite for her friends. She did all of this while mocking my career in hospitality as a fake job. I did not argue. I did not cry in the lobby. I just took the valet tickets and smiled, because there was one detail about this $2,000 a night resort my mother did not know. 48 hours later, she would be standing in that same lobby, her platinum card maxed out, her friends staring in shock, watching the entire executive staff of the resort bow their heads to me. Welcome back to Morning Revenge, where quiet women tell you exactly how they stopped auditing the disrespect and started invoicing it. If you have ever had your success belittled by the very people you were secretly providing for, tell me your age in the comments below. Let me back up because you need to understand exactly how the trap was set. The air in Aspen carries a distinct scent of pine and unyielding altitude. In this particular enclave of Colorado, wealth is not merely displayed, it is performed. The elite measure their status through holistic mastery. They trade in oxygen therapies, bespoke wellness circuits, and real estate tucked away in the rugged crags of the Rocky Mountains. Aura Alpine stands at the apex of this culture, a sanctuary of stone and frosted glass that caters to people who demand perfection and are willing to pay an exorbitant premium to get it. I know this because I built it. I am the principal consultant for Alpine Hospitality, but more importantly, I am the sole registered owner of Aura Alpine. My name is buried beneath 3 layers of corporate shielding, an LLC structure I designed to keep my private life separate from my public assets. My mother views the lifestyle industry as a playground for individuals lacking the ambition for corporate conquest. In her social circles, she dismisses my work as a glorified hobby. She operates under the assumption that my days consist of organizing yoga mats and distributing cucumber water. A sleek black town car glided to a halt in the circular drive. The rear door swung open and Diana emerged. She adjusted her cashmere scarf, sweeping her gaze over the resort facade with a practiced, critical eye. My older sister Lauren followed her thumbs flying across her phone screen, entirely oblivious to the mountain ranges surrounding us. Diana did not offer a greeting when I stepped out of the front passenger seat. Instead, she extended 2 paper claim tickets toward me. Her eyes never met mine. "Take these," she said, her focus already drifting toward the grand entrance. "You understand how these hospitality workers function? Ensure they handle the bags properly. The clasps on my vintage trunks are sensitive." I took the tickets. I held my silence. I did not mention that Marcus the valet, currently approaching their vehicle in his pressed slate gray uniform, drew his salary from my operating budget. I did not point out that I had personally authored the handling protocol he was executing. I viewed her condescension through the lens of an auditor. I learned long ago to treat family slights not as emotional injuries, but as line items in a ledger. Anger costs energy. Observation is free. Lauren finally looked up from her screen, adjusting the collar of her designer ski jacket. "Are we checking in, or are we standing in the driveway all afternoon?" she asked, sighing, as if the crisp mountain air was a personal inconvenience. "Brad is joining us tomorrow, and I need to make sure the Wi-Fi in my suite can handle his trading platform." A faint buzz vibrated in my coat pocket. I slipped my phone out and glanced at the screen. It was an automated notification from the resort front desk software, a system that pings my personal device whenever a master reservation is altered. I tapped the alert. Diana had modified our bookings while we were in the air. The original itinerary, which I had arranged and paid for weeks prior, placed all 3 of us in adjacent Mountain View suites. The updated folio painted a different picture. Diana and Lauren were now registered in the panoramic penthouse wings, the most expensive accommodations on the property. My name had been reassigned to a standard double room on the second floor directly across from the ice machine and the service elevator. I locked the screen and slid the device back into my pocket. Arrogance always leaves a paper trail. One simply has to wait for the ink to dry. Diana had stolen my suite to upgrade her own experience, assuming I lacked the authority to notice and the spine to object. She treated my presence as a logistical necessity, a built-in assistant to manage the tedious aspects of her vacation. "Come along, Calliope," Diana said, turning her back to me and walking toward the sliding glass doors. "Let us see if this facility lives up to the brochure. Try to take notes while we are here. You might learn a thing or two about your little industry." I picked up my canvas duffel bag. The heavy glass doors parted silently, releasing the warm scent of cedar and eucalyptus into the freezing air. I followed my mother and sister across the threshold, stepping out of the Colorado cold and into the lobby of my own empire. The lobby of Aura Alpine smelled of imported cedar and crushed eucalyptus. The grand check-in desk was carved from a single massive slab of reclaimed mahogany. It anchored the sprawling reception area like a fortress of absolute luxury. My family approached the polished surface with the frantic energy of people desperate to prove they belonged. Lauren dragged her customized matching luggage set across the imported slate floor. She was clinging tightly to the arm of a man I had never met in person before today. This was Brad. My sister had spent the past 6 months bragging about her new fiancé and his supposed financial empire in Denver. He wore a fleece vest layered over a crisp designer dress shirt. A heavy silver watch adorned his wrist. It was the universal uniform of a modern finance enthusiast who wanted everyone to know exactly what his annual bonus looked like. Brad released my sister and extended a hand toward me. His grip was entirely too firm. He offered a wide smile that failed to reach his rapidly scanning eyes. He immediately assessed my plain cashmere sweater and simple dark jeans. Within seconds, he categorized me as entirely unimportant. "Lauren told me you work around here, Calliope," Brad said loudly. His voice carried across the quiet, elegant lobby. He leaned closer and dropped his volume to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, since you have the inside track with the hotel staff, maybe you could slide us some complimentary premium drink vouchers. The boys back at my firm love a good hospitality hookup." I stared at his outstretched palm, and the smug expression plastered across his face. Brad was attempting to exploit a connection he believed was completely beneath him, just to save a few dollars on craft cocktails. I offered a tight, polite smile and informed him that I did not handle the beverage inventory. My sister rolled her eyes dramatically. She sighed and adjusted her expensive leather handbag. Lauren muttered something under her breath about my complete lack of ambition. She had always viewed my independence as a personal insult to her deeply traditional worldview. Before Brad could press the issue regarding his free drinks, a sharp, high-pitched squeal shattered the serene atmosphere of the grand atrium. My mother had spotted a familiar face near the grand stone fireplace. Sylvia was an aging Aspen socialite who regularly attended the same exclusive charity galas as my parents. Diana practically sprinted across the slate floor to intercept the wealthy woman. They exchanged a flurry of performative air kisses that completely missed their actual cheeks. My mother was absolutely glowing with the validation of being recognized in such an elite environment. Sylvia peered over the rim of her designer sunglasses and directed her gaze toward our awkward group standing by the mahogany desk. She asked my mother what her 2 beautiful daughters were doing these days. Diana puffed out her chest and proudly announced that Lauren was currently planning the high society wedding of the decade with a top-tier investment manager. Then Sylvia shifted her attention directly onto me. My mother visibly stiffened. Her radiant smile instantly transformed into a tight grimace of profound embarrassment. "Oh, Calliope is just finding herself in the wellness space right now," Diana announced brightly. Her voice was dripping with a toxic blend of fake sympathy and genuine shame. She patted my shoulder with a heavy, condescending hand. "She is taking a little break from the real corporate world to explore some alternative mountain lifestyle projects. We are just so incredibly supportive of her little journey." In the viciously competitive dialect of wealthy American suburbs, my mother had just translated my existence into a tragic cautionary tale. Finding herself in the wellness space was the polite country club translation for being completely unemployed, entirely delusional, and chronically broke. I absorbed the public insult without letting a single muscle in my face twitch. My mother measured human value strictly through traditional metrics. She worshipped prestigious corporate titles, heavily taxed W-2 income, and expensive leased vehicles. She was fundamentally blind to the reality of modern wealth generation. True financial power is not found in a middle management promotion or a flashy corner office. True power resides in quiet equity. It is built through anonymous, limited liability companies, commercial real estate deeds, and the ruthless compounding of passive capital. My family desperately wanted to look rich. I simply wanted to own the ground they stood on. My internal reflections were interrupted by the arrival of Elena. The senior concierge stepped up to the mahogany counter to process the new arrivals. Elena was a brilliant hospitality professional whom I had personally recruited from a luxury resort in Switzerland 2 years ago. She wore the immaculate tailored forest green uniform of Aura Alpine. Her posture was flawless. Elena looked up from her computer terminal and made direct eye contact with me. A flash of immediate recognition sparked in her dark eyes. She knew exactly who was standing on the other side of the desk. I was the principal owner of the entire mountain. I held her employment contract in my personal filing cabinet. I maintained my neutral expression and offered a microscopic rehearsed shake of my head. It was a silent command executed entirely below the radar of my chaotic family. Elena possessed the instincts of a seasoned diplomat. She blinked once smoothly, severing the visual connection, and turned her brightest professional smile entirely onto my mother. "Welcome to Aura Alpine, madam," Elena purred softly. "I have your reservation ready. We just need a card for the incidentals and the remaining balance of the weekend stay." Diana strutted back to the counter after concluding her grand performance with the socialite. She opened her purse and retrieved a heavy platinum credit card. She slapped the plastic onto the mahogany surface with aggressive authority. As Elena processed the transaction, my mother leaned over to Brad and began complaining loudly about the exorbitant nightly rate of this specific facility. She griped that the owners must be absolute extortionists to charge such outrageous prices for a weekend in the mountains. She grumbled about the hidden resort fees and the high cost of the mandatory valet parking. I watched the electronic merchant terminal flash a bright green approval message. A deep wave of pure, satisfying irony washed over my entire body. My mother was loudly condemning the financial greed of the resort management while actively funding my private investment portfolio. Every single dollar she begrudgingly authorized through that credit card swipe flowed directly into my personal corporate trust. The fake success she had just mocked in front of her wealthy friend was actively subsidized by her own desperate need to appear elite. She was literally paying for the privilege of insulting me in my own building. Elena handed the platinum card back, along with a pair of electronic room keys nestled inside a crisp linen envelope. Diana snatched the items from the counter. She turned around to face our group and clapped her hands together sharply. She announced that it was time to review the schedule she had meticulously crafted for this important family bonding experience. My mother reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of printed papers. They were securely bound inside a clear plastic folder. She distributed a copy to Lauren. She handed a copy to Brad. Then she turned to me and handed over the final packet. I looked down at the immaculate, color-coded document resting in my hands. The cover page proudly displayed the title of the Holland Family Celebration Weekend. I flipped open the heavy cardstock cover and scanned the first column. There was a private champagne tasting scheduled for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Next to the event, a small printed bracket indicated that only Diana, Lauren, and Brad were registered to attend. I checked the dinner reservation for 8 o'clock at the Premier Steakhouse downstairs. The table was strictly booked for a party of 3. I looked at the Sunday morning hot air balloon excursion. 3 passengers. Every single luxury activity, every private dining experience, and every exclusive spa treatment was explicitly marked for the 3 of them. I stood silently in the middle of my own spectacular creation and stared at the physical evidence of my total exclusion. My mother had not invited me to this mountain to reconnect or celebrate my sister. She had summoned me here to serve as a convenient emotional punching bag and an unpaid personal assistant. I was the designated luggage watcher. I was the emergency errand runner. As Diana began barking orders about where I should carry their heavy bags, the true nature of the impending battlefield became crystal clear. The next morning arrived with the sharp, blinding clarity that only high-altitude sunlight can provide. I woke early in my standard double room across from the service elevator. The mechanical groan of the freight carriage had punctuated my sleep throughout the night, serving as a rhythmic reminder of my designated place in the family hierarchy. I dressed in unassuming black athletic wear, tied my hair back into a tight knot, and carried my secure tablet down to the lobby cafe. The morning lounge at Aura Alpine is designed to mimic a European solarium. Sunlight poured through expansive glass panes, illuminating the hand-scraped oak tables and catching the steam rising from porcelain cups. I ordered a black coffee from a barista whose paycheck bore my corporate signature, then took a seat at a small corner table. To the other early risers, I looked like an ordinary visitor scrolling through morning emails. They saw a young woman in practical leggings. They did not see the architect reviewing the structural integrity of her own empire. Every morning at 6 o'clock, my resort management software compiles an overnight financial ledger. The system reconciles the daily revenue flags billing discrepancies and tracks high-tier guest spending patterns. I open the encrypted file. The numbers cascaded down my screen in neat, predictable rows, offering the soothing certainty of balanced arithmetic. I scrolled directly to the Holland reservation profile, intending to monitor the damage my mother was inflicting on her own credit limit. Instead of a routine authorization pending on Diana's heavy platinum card, I found a glaring anomaly. A red flag glowed in the routing column. The $12,000 charge for the panoramic penthouse upgrades had bypassed her primary payment method entirely. The system displayed a direct wire transfer clearing from an external checking account. I recognized the last 4 digits of the routing number immediately, and the coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted like ash. 3 years prior, my father experienced a sudden cardiovascular scare. It was nothing terminal, but the event proved severe enough to rattle the foundation of my parents' perceived invincibility. Diana had paced the hospital waiting room, spiraling into a panic about liquid assets and insurance deductibles. To calm her escalating anxieties, I established the Holland Family Emergency Fund. We pitched it to the bank as a joint venture, a safety net for medical emergencies and unforeseen crises. My parents contributed a modest initial sum. I quietly funded the remaining 90%. I deposited thousands of dollars every quarter, treating the account as a silent insurance policy for the people who raised me. I never asked for gratitude because they never knew the true balance, nor did they suspect the primary source of the capital. I stared at the illuminated tablet screen, letting the cold reality of the transaction settle into my bones. Diana had not paid for her luxury upgrade. She had drafted the funds directly from the medical emergency account. The money I secretly earned from this very spa, which I had safely tucked away to ensure my mother would never lose her home to a hospital bill, was now paying for her penthouse suite. The betrayal was exact, calculated, and unfeeling. She raided our safety net to purchase a temporary status symbol, deliberately using those stolen funds to elevate herself while banishing me to the service corridor. Before the math could trigger an emotional response, a flash of ivory silk caught my peripheral vision. Lauren strolled into the cafe. She had abandoned her heavy designer ski jacket for something far more comfortable. She was wrapped tightly in a signature Aura Alpine lounging robe. I knew the garment intimately. Those robes are hand-stitched in Italy, embroidered with our silver crest, and retail for $400 in the resort boutique. Lauren ordered a complicated espresso drink and drifted over to my small corner table. She ran a manicured hand over the smooth silk lapel of her new garment, looking down at my plain black athletic shirt with a mixture of amusement and pity. "Good morning, Callie," Lauren chimed, taking a delicate sip of her foam-topped beverage. "Are you plotting out the driving route to town for Brad's custom boots? He gets very particular about his footwear, so please make sure the shop adjusts the bindings correctly. Brad says the true test of a resort town is how well their technicians handle elite gear." "I am reviewing some figures," I replied, keeping my voice steady and my eyes fixed on hers. "I see you visited the boutique this morning." Lauren offered a smug, self-satisfied smile, adjusting the silk belt around her waist. "Mom took care of it. She said since the trip is a celebration of my engagement, we should embrace the full luxury experience while we are here. You really should go look at their inventory today. They have some lovely discounted items on the clearance rack near the back corner. You might find a nice cotton wrap if you stretch your budget." I sat perfectly still. My sister stood in my cafe wearing my $400 merchandise, bragging about a purchase funded by money my mother stole from my savings. A lesser woman would have flipped the reclaimed wood table. A more emotional daughter would have confronted Lauren right there, demanding recognition and causing a scene about the sheer audacity of the theft. I do not cause scenes. I do not bargain with entitled people. I confront the numbers. "The silk suits you, Lauren?" I said evenly, offering a polite nod. "I will make sure to check the clearance rack before I head into town for the boots." Lauren hummed in agreement, turning on her heel to glide back toward the elevators, her expensive coffee in hand. I watched her depart, a walking embodiment of financial ignorance. She believed she was floating on a cloud of generational wealth, unaware that the cloud was actually a lease I could terminate at any moment. I picked up my phone. I bypassed the resort software and opened my encrypted messaging application. I typed a single line of text to my private wealth manager down in Denver. The message was brief and devoid of emotion. "Freeze the Holland Family Emergency Fund routing privileges immediately. 0 authorized outbound transfers effective this minute." I watched the read receipt appear on the screen. 2 seconds later, a simple thumbs up icon confirmed the action. The account was locked. The trap was set. There is a profound peace that comes from treating family trauma like a corporate restructuring. You stop waiting for apologies you will never receive. You stop trying to explain your value to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, you change the access codes. Boundaries are best enforced with banking alerts, not shouting matches. When the money stops flowing, the truth always rises to the surface, bringing the actual cost of disrespect into the harsh light of day. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the caffeine sharpen my focus. I closed my tablet, slipping it into my bag, and folded my hands on the table. Right on cue, the heavy glass cafe doors swung open. Diana marched through the entryway. She was not wearing a silk robe. She was dressed in pristine white resort wear, her posture rigid and commanding. Tucked tightly under her arm was a thick leather-bound clipboard holding several sheets of paper. She spotted me in the corner and charted a direct course, her heels clicking sharply against the floorboards. The matriarch was arriving to dictate the manual labor schedule for her assistant, entirely unaware that her assistant had just dismantled the financial infrastructure of her vacation while the real adults prepared for hydrotherapy. Diana set the heavy leather clipboard on the wooden table with a sharp click. She did not ask if I was ready to listen. She simply pointed her manicured index finger at the top sheet where her precise cursive outlined my obligations for the rest of the day. "You will take the SUV into town before noon," Diana said, her voice carrying the flat, imperative tone she used when giving instructions to domestic help. "Retrieve Brad's ski boots from the specialty shop on Galena Street. Ensure the technician verifies the custom footbeds. After that, you will stop by the boutique on Cooper Avenue to pick up Lauren's altered dress. Do not leave the garments in the vehicle where they might wrinkle. Bring them straight to their penthouse suites." I looked at the list. It was a tedious collection of errands designed to keep me occupied, isolated, and off the property while the rest of the family enjoyed the amenities I paid to maintain. "I will handle it," I said, keeping my posture relaxed and my expression entirely blank. Diana offered a curt nod, satisfied that her authority had been recognized, and swept out of the cafe toward the spa elevator. I folded the list and slid it into my pocket alongside my secure tablet and walked through the heavy glass doors onto the rear terrace. The mountain terrace at Aura Alpine features a sweeping gas fire pit built from local granite, positioned over a timber deck that looks directly out across the valley. The morning cold was sharp and dry, burning the back of my throat with every inhalation. I stood near the flames, letting the radiant heat press against my legs while the icy alpine wind whipped around my coat. The heavy timber door creaked open behind me. Heavy boot heels crunched against the frost-dusted deck. I did not turn around. I could hear the rhythm of the footfalls, erratic and hurried. Brad stepped into view, moving around the perimeter of the stone fire pit. The confident, polished persona he had performed in the lobby yesterday was visibly fraying around the edges. He wore a designer wool ski sweater, but damp circles darkened the fabric beneath his arms despite the sub-zero temperature. A faint layer of perspiration glistened on his forehead. He kept one hand buried in his vest pocket, his thumb flicking nervously against a metal key fob. He glanced back to cross toward the glass doors to verify that neither Lauren nor my mother had followed him onto the terrace. When he satisfied himself that we were alone, he sat on the granite coping opposite me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Callie," he said, dropping his voice into a low, hurried register, "I need a quick word with you before everyone gets pulled into the afternoon spa schedule." I turned my head slightly, observing the tremor in his hands. "I am listening, Brad." He cleared his throat, running a palm over his slicked-back hair. "Listen, we are family now, or we will be in 6 months. Lauren has her heart set on doing the wedding reception here at Aura Alpine. She wants a full property buyout for an entire weekend in October. 50 guest suites, exclusive access to the dining rooms, private hydrotherapy access, the whole package." I kept my hands resting quietly in my coat pockets. "That is a significant event footprint," I noted smoothly. "A weekend buyout during peak autumn foliage is our most expensive contract tier. The property base rate alone starts at $90,000 before food, beverage, and staffing gratuities." Brad flinched at the figure. A tight muscle twitched along his jawline. He leaned closer, the smell of expensive cologne and stale bourbon drifting across the flames between us. "That is why I am talking to you," Brad whispered, his eyes darting toward the glass doors once more. "Lauren thinks my firm had a banner fourth quarter. She thinks we are dropping $200,000 on this wedding without blinking. The reality is my capital is tied up. I took a heavy position in a tech venture that got hit with a regulatory delay. My liquidity is locked until the second quarter of next year, and the deposit for this place is due in 3 weeks." I listened to the confession with the clinical detachment of an accountant reviewing a failing balance sheet. Brad worked for a small wealth management boutique in Denver, a firm that specialized in convincing moderately wealthy clients to pay inflated management fees. He lived a life constructed entirely of leveraged lease payments and short-term margin calls. He had proposed to my sister with a ring he could not afford, promising her an elite lifestyle built on a foundation of paper debt. "You are asking about booking terms," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I am asking you to use your position," Brad said, his voice rising with a sharp edge of impatience. "You do event planning and hospitality. You know how these resorts operate. There is always a 20 or 30% markup built into venue quotes for operational padding. I need you to go to the general manager today and get us a family rate. Better yet, get the venue fee waived entirely as an internal promotional event. Tell them it brings exposure to their high net worth clientele." I looked at him across the leaping flames. The sheer audacity of his request was a remarkable thing to witness. Less than 24 hours ago, he had openly mocked my career in front of my sister, dismissing my work as lower-tier staff labor. Now, facing the catastrophic collapse of his financial illusion, he was begging me to exploit that very same career to salvage his reputation. He wanted me to steal $90,000 worth of resort inventory to cover his bad trades. "What is your current debt-to-income ratio, Brad?" I asked softly. He blinked, taken aback by the question. "What does that have to do with anything?" "If your capital is illiquid," I continued, my voice steady and unhurried, "then you are operating on a negative cash flow margin. Aura Alpine does not waive venue fees for promotional exposure. We operate at a 92% occupancy rate year-round. Waiving a peak autumn buyout represents a direct loss of $90,000 in net revenue plus the food and beverage minimums. If I approached management with a request to give away property inventory to an underfunded private party, it would demonstrate a complete ignorance of basic asset management." Brad's face flushed a deep, mottled red. The perspiration on his forehead gathered into visible droplets. The desperate, pleading tone vanished, replaced instantly by the defensive hostility of a man whose bluff has been called. "Are you serious right now?" Brad sneered, standing up from the granite bench and stepping closer to me. "You are auditing my personal finances. You fold towels and arrange banquet chairs for a living, Callie. Do not sit there and lecture me about asset management." I did not step back. I stood my ground, my hands remaining calmly tucked inside my coat pockets. "I am simply looking at the balance sheet you just described," I replied quietly. "You want a $90,000 luxury experience, but you lack the liquid capital to secure the contract. That is not a corporate communication issue, Brad. That is arithmetic. I do not have the authority to fix bad math." Brad let out a harsh, bitter laugh that died quickly in the cold mountain air. His eyes narrowed into slits as he looked down at me. "You really are as useless as your mother says you are," he spat, leaning in until his face was inches from mine. "You get a little title at a middle-tier hospitality firm, and suddenly you think you are a financial gatekeeper? You are a glorified receptionist, Callie. You hold clipboard errands for your family because that is the absolute ceiling of your capability. Lauren and I are going to have our wedding, and when the bill comes, real men will handle it. Stay out of things you do not have the brainpower to understand." He spun on his heel, adjusting his wool sweater with a sharp jerk of his shoulders, and marched back toward the timber doors. He shoved them open with unnecessary force and vanished into the warm interior of the lobby, confident that he had delivered a devastating humiliation to an inferior relative. I stood by the fire pit for a long moment, watching the smoke drift up toward the snow-covered pines. My heart rate had not elevated, my hands were perfectly still. I retrieved my phone from my pocket. I opened my encrypted internal messaging application and selected Elena's profile at the concierge desk. When my mother booked our arrival, the system automatically applied our standard family guest tier to all associated room profiles. That tier included waived resort fees, complimentary access to the executive lounge, and a 20% courtesy discount on all food and beverage charges. I typed a brief message to Elena. "Select guest profile for Brad Miller, remove the family courtesy tier immediately, revert his room tab lounge access and incidental billing to standard retail rates. Apply the change retroactively to his arrival yesterday afternoon, including all beverage charges from the main lounge." I watched the screen as Elena read the instruction. A simple confirmation appeared a second later. "Updated." I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. Brad had walked off that terrace believing he had put a glorified receptionist in her place. He had no idea that his fragile ego had just cost him several $1,000s in retroactive bar tabs and luxury resort surcharges. He was operating in a world where he thought he was the predator, entirely oblivious to the reality that he was standing inside my trap. I checked my watch. It was nearly 11 o'clock. My mother's clipboard demanded that I retrieve Brad's custom ski boots from the shop down in town. I pulled on my leather gloves and walked toward the valet stand. The real adults were scheduled for their exclusive $2,000 hydrotherapy session in 2 hours a session that was about to encounter a very unexpected structural obstacle. The afternoon sun crested the jagged peaks of the Elk Mountain Range, casting a blinding, brilliant glare across the frozen expanse of the valley. By 2 o'clock, the atmosphere inside Ora Alpine had shifted from the quiet hum of morning arrivals into the purposeful energy of high society at leisure. This was the window for the Signature Wellness Circuit, a heavily curated 3-hour hydrotherapy journey that commanded a $2,000 price tag per participant. It was the crown jewel of the resort schedule, an exclusive sequence of mineral baths, oxygen infusion chambers, and thermal plunges designed to reset the nervous systems of people who measured stress in million-dollar portfolio fluctuations. I walked down the sunlit corridor of the lower spa level, wearing a standard-issue white waffle weave robe provided to every guest in the secondary accommodation blocks. My bare feet patted softly against the heated slate flooring. I carried a small cotton pouch containing my locker key and room card, maintaining the outward appearance of a quiet family member tagging along on a luxury vacation she could barely afford. Near the frosted glass entrance of the hydrotherapy pavilion, a small crowd had gathered. My mother stood at the center of the group holding court, with the easy confidence of a woman who believed she owned the landscape. She was flanked by Lauren and Brad, who had recovered swiftly from his morning financial panic by hiding behind a designer puffer vest. 2 other women stood with them, draped in cashmere wraps and heavy gold jewelry. One was Sylvia, the Aspen socialite from yesterday, and the other was a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn, whose family owned a chain of private medical clinics across the state. I approached the group, intending to join them for the introductory briefing before the session began. As I stepped into their circle, my mother turned her expression, shifting instantly into a masterpiece of performative regret. "Oh, Calliope," Diana sighed, her voice projecting just enough to catch the attention of the surrounding guests and staff. "Here you are. I was hoping you managed to catch the administrative update before you wandered down here." I stopped 2 paces away, keeping my hands loose at my sides. "What update, Mother?" Diana offered a sympathetic tilt of her head, the kind of expression one reserves for a distant acquaintance who has missed a bus. Well, there appears to have been an unfortunate administrative mix-up with the session rosters. When I booked the group circuit months ago, the concierge desk apparently miscalculated our party size. They only allocated 4 VIP passes for our family block, plus the 2 guest slots I promised Sylvia and Evelyn. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air, while her socialite friends looked on with polite, distant expressions of mild curiosity. Naturally, Diana continued, smoothing the lapel of her white robe with practiced elegance. We had to prioritize the registered guests and our invited peers. Brad and Lauren are celebrating their engagement after all, and our friends traveled across the state to join us. We simply do not have an extra opening for a 5th family member. The exclusion was clean public and executed with the surgical precision of someone who had spent decades mastering social hierarchy. It was designed to diminish me in front of an audience, reminding everyone present that I was an accessory to the group rather than an equal participant. Lauren offered a tight, apologetic grimace, though her eyes betrayed a quiet satisfaction. "It is such a shame, Callie. You really would have loved the mineral plunge, but rules are rules, and the spa capacity is strictly managed." Before I could formulate a response, Diana reached into the deep pocket of her robe and withdrew a small rectangular piece of plastic. She stepped forward and pressed a green Starbucks gift card into my palm, curling my fingers around it with patronizing warmth. "Now do not sit around the room looking forlorn," Diana instructed, pitching her voice into a gentle, motherly register that made my teeth ache. "I know high-end hydrotherapy and complex wellness regimens can be a bit overwhelming for someone who is still finding her footing in the industry. Why do you not take this $20 card and walk down to the Public Village coffee shop? You can sit by the window and catch up on your emails or handle whatever little consulting tasks you have on your phone. Take your time. We will meet you back at the suite for dinner." The subtle cruelty of the gesture was breathtaking. She was banishing me from my own property with a $20 coffee voucher, treating me like a troublesome teenager who needed to be sent away so the adults could enjoy themselves. Sylvia offered a thin, tight smile. "How thoughtful of you, Diana. It is so important to keep young people occupied." I looked down at the little plastic card in my hand, then back up at my mother's composed, smiling face. The layers of entitlement were staggering. She was standing in the most advanced wellness facility in the Rocky Mountains, a resort constructed through my strategic vision and funded by my capital, and she was dismissing me to a local coffee shop so she could play Lady of the Manor with my assets. I did not raise my voice. I did not fling the gift card across the marble floor. I simply closed my fingers around the plastic, letting the smooth surface press against my palm. "Thank you for the suggestion, Mother," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level, devoid of any defensive friction. "Enjoy your hydrotherapy session. Make sure you check your account statements afterward. You might find the pricing structure enlightening." Diana blinked, momentarily derailed by my lack of visible distress, but quickly recovered with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Run along now, sweetheart. Don't let us keep you from your paperwork." I turned away from them, watching through the clear panels as the group drifted past the frosted glass doors of the hydrotherapy pavilion, the attendants bowing slightly as they welcomed my mother into the sanctuary. I stood alone in the sunlit corridor, holding a $20 coffee card, while the sound of cascading mineral water echoed faintly through the walls. In families like mine, exclusion is used as currency. It is a weapon forged from insecurity, designed to keep the hierarchy intact by making the victim feel small, dispensable, and eternally grateful for scraps. For years, I had absorbed those blows, treating them as structural flaws in a difficult relationship. I had tried to earn love through competence, believing that if I built enough success, my family would finally look past their traditionalist prejudice and see me as a peer. Standing there in the quiet hallway, the illusion finally evaporated. You cannot earn respect from people who profit from your minimization. You can only change the terms of engagement. I did not walk toward the public exit. I did not head down to the village coffee shop. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked in the opposite direction, toward the discreet, unmarked service corridor tucked behind the main structural pillars. The public areas of Aura Alpine are designed to project effortless, organic luxury, but beneath the polished stone lies a hyper-efficient administrative infrastructure. I reached a heavy steel door fitted with a sophisticated biometric scanner. I pressed my thumb against the glass reader and stared into the optical lens. The green light flashed instantly. A soft mechanical click signaled the release of the deadbolt. I stepped inside the private administrative elevator. The doors slid shut behind me, sealing off the ambient noise of the resort. I pressed the top button, the one labeled Executive Penthouse and Command Center. As the car began its smooth, silent ascent through the core of the building, I shed the persona of the disregarded daughter, the way one sheds a wet coat. The elevator opened directly into my private office suite, a sprawling, glass-walled room overlooking the entire valley. The space was devoid of family photographs, but it was rich in data. I walked across the hardwood floor to the private dressing room attached to the office. I stripped off the generic waffle-weave hotel robe that my mother had used to mark my station. I opened my cedar wardrobe, sliding my fingers across the fabric of a razor-sharp bespoke charcoal wool suit tailored precisely for my frame. I dressed with deliberate slowness, buttoning the silk blouse, snapping the belt into place, and slipping my feet into black Italian leather heels. When I stepped back into the office, the transformation was complete. The quiet, compliant relative had vanished. The principal owner had returned to her desk. I sat down in the high-backed leather chair and tapped the edge of my obsidian desk. 3 curved monitors woke up simultaneously, illuminating the glass room with the soft, steady glow of real-time analytics. I opened the master dashboard of Aura Alpine. The system displayed the live telemetry of every department across the 400-acre property. I could see occupancy rates, kitchen inventory levels, staff deployment schedules, and, most importantly, the active guest ledger. My fingers danced across the mechanical keyboard. I pulled up the real-time billing profile for the hydrotherapy session currently underway in the pavilion below. On the screen, 6 accounts were currently logged into the circuit session: Diana Holland, Lauren Holland, Brad Miller, Sylvia Vance, Evelyn Cross, and an open administrative slot linked directly to the primary family portfolio. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands lightly on the armrests. I looked at the $20 Starbucks gift card resting quietly beside my keyboard. For years I had audited my family's disrespect, cataloging every slight, every insult, and every unearned demand, filing them away in the quiet ledgers of my mind. I had acted as the silent absorber of their emotional debt. The audit was officially over. It was time to start invoicing. I descended from the executive penthouse in the private administrative elevator, leaving the quiet sanctuary of my data monitors for the active floor of the resort. The physical transformation felt significant. 10 minutes earlier, I was a dismissed relative wearing a generic cotton robe, banished to a local coffee shop with a piece of plastic. Now I was encased in charcoal wool and Italian leather, stepping back into the world as the absolute authority of the mountain. The soft chime of the elevator signaled my arrival on the subterranean wellness level. The steel doors parted, revealing a discreet utility corridor that bypassed the main guest atrium. Waiting for me in the hallway were 2 individuals who formed the operational backbone of my enterprise. Elena stood perfectly upright, holding a digital tablet pressed against her dark uniform. Beside her was Marcus Thorne, the general director of Aura Alpine. I had recruited Marcus from a legendary luxury portfolio in Zurich 3 years ago. He is a man who operates with surgical precision, possessing a terrifying ability to spot a misaligned floral arrangement from 50 paces away. He understands that true hospitality is not about subservience, but about anticipating desires before the guest even recognizes them. Marcus knew my true identity, of course, just as he knew every microscopic detail about the daily operations of the property. "Good afternoon, Calliope," Marcus greeted smoothly, his voice a low, modulated baritone. "We have prepared the weekly facility audit. The thermal pools are running at optimal mineral concentrations, and the security rotations are functioning seamlessly. We are ready for your walkthrough whenever you are. Let us proceed," I replied, offering a brief nod. We stepped out of the hidden service corridor and merged into the primary circulation pathways of the VIP sector. The atmosphere shifted immediately. When a guest walks through these halls, the staff fade into the background, providing invisible service. When the principal owner walks the floor, flanked by the executive team, a different energy takes hold. Housekeeping staff straightened their posture as we passed. Spa attendants offered subtle, respectful inclinations of their heads. The transition was absolute. I was no longer navigating my mother's vacation itinerary. I was inspecting my own kingdom. The architecture of the hydrotherapy wing was designed to mimic the natural geothermal caverns of the surrounding mountain ranges. We used imported dark slate for the floors and installed ambient lighting that washed the textured stone walls in a warm golden glow. The air was thick with the restorative scent of crushed eucalyptus and cedarwood. It was a space engineered for supreme tranquility, utilizing advanced acoustic dampening materials to ensure that no sound escaped the individual treatment chambers. However, architecture always contains intentional vulnerabilities. To maintain safety protocols without installing invasive cameras inside the steam rooms, we integrated specialized acoustic ventilation grates. These discrete vents allow the concierge team to pipe in customized meditation frequencies. But when the ambient audio is paused between tracks, the channels act as perfect acoustic conduits, carrying voices from inside the chamber directly out into the adjoining administrative hallway. I navigated the slate pathway, listening to Marcus detail the quarterly revenue projections for the botanical treatment packages. Elena walked a half step behind us, continuously updating the digital folio. As we approached the frosted glass exterior of the Grand Eucalyptus Steam Pavilion, the automated audio system cycled through its scheduled transition. The soothing background frequencies faded into momentary silence. During that brief window of quiet, a voice echoed clearly through the brass ventilation grate, positioned just above our heads. It was a sharp, carrying tone, completely devoid of the hushed reverence normally reserved for the sanctuary. It was Diana. Marcus paused his revenue briefing mid-sentence. Elena stopped walking, her finger freezing above her tablet screen. The three of us stood in the warm, dimly lit corridor, anchored to the floor by the sheer volume of my mother holding court inside the steam room. "Did you see Calliope wandering around the lobby earlier?" a different voice asked. I recognized the cultured, inquisitive drawl of Sylvia the Aspen socialite, who had joined the family circuit. "Does she work at one of the little ski lodges down in the village? I could have sworn she looked like she was running errands for someone." A sharp, echoing laugh resonated through the vent. The cruelty in Diana's amusement was palpable, slicing through the heavy, fragrant air of the corridor. "Calliope," Diana replied, her tone dripping with performative pity. "No, she is just drifting right now. Honestly, I would not be surprised if she snuck in through the back door this afternoon just to use the guest showers. She has this fake little consulting hobby she tries to pass off as a career, but it is truly embarrassing. We brought her along this weekend because I felt guilty leaving her alone in Denver, but you know how difficult it is to integrate someone who simply refuses to apply themselves." I stood motionless beneath the brass grate. The betrayal unfolding on the other side of the frosted glass was total and absolute. This was not a matter of financial ignorance or generational misunderstanding. This was an active, deliberate assassination of my character. Diana was not just blind to my success. She was weaponizing a fabricated narrative of my failure to protect her own ego. She needed to present herself as the benevolent, suffering matriarch, burdened by an inadequate daughter, using my perceived mediocrity as social currency to purchase admiration from her wealthy friends. She was sitting in a $2,000 steam chamber that I financed, surrounded by imported Italian marble that I selected, bragging to her friends about how I probably snuck in through the delivery entrance. I shifted my gaze away from the glass and looked at my executive team. The professional composure of my general director had completely fractured. Marcus stood frozen, his eyes wide, staring at the ventilation grate with an expression of profound, unadulterated horror. He had spent the last 3 years watching me negotiate multi-million-dollar vendor contracts, dismantle aggressive corporate takeover attempts, and build a hospitality empire from the ground up. He knew exactly who was standing beside him in the charcoal suit. Hearing a guest describe his ruthless, brilliant employer as a pathetic drifter sneaking in for a free shower had effectively short-circuited his brain. Elena looked equally devastated. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the digital tablet. She glanced at me, her eyes telegraphing a mixture of deep empathy and sheer protective fury. They were both highly paid professionals, entirely capable of handling demanding billionaires and impossible requests, but they were completely paralyzed by the intimate cruelty of the family dynamic playing out over the audio feed. They looked at me holding their breath in the humid air, waiting for the inevitable explosion. They expected the daughter to react. They expected tears or shouting or a dramatic push through the heavy glass doors to confront the liars in the steam. I did not barge in screaming. Anger is a volatile emotion that gives the opponent a chance to defend themselves. I prefer the chilling efficiency of protocol. I smoothed the lapel of my bespoke jacket and turned my attention fully to the General Director Marcus. I said, keeping my voice pitched at a calm, conversational volume that betrayed absolutely nothing. He jolted slightly, snapping his attention back to me. "Yes, Calliope," he managed to say, his voice strained. "What is the standard procedure when an administrative hold is placed on a primary guest account, but the associated party is currently utilizing a restricted tier amenity?" I asked. Marcus blinked, his highly trained mind struggling to switch from personal shock back to operational procedure. "If a primary account faces a sudden financial hold," he recited, regaining a fraction of his normal rhythm, "the standard procedure is to halt service and verify the authorization status of all individuals attached to that folio." "Excellent," I murmured, staring directly at the frosted glass that separated my mother from the consequences of her arrogance. Because 15 minutes ago, I instructed our wealth management division to freeze the routing numbers supplying Diana Holland's master folio. Her account is now technically insolvent. Elena gasped softly, the realization dawning on her face as she looked down at her tablet. "I need you to initiate a VIP status verification protocol for the Eucalyptus Pavilion," I instructed, my tone shifting into the cold, commanding register of the principal owner. "Do not use the security personnel. I want the front desk management team down here. I want them to enter that chamber, interrupt the session, and require every single person in that room to produce valid payment authorization in front of the entire group. When Diana attempts to use her platinum card, it will decline because the secondary hold I placed on her profile dictates that all incidentals must route through the now frozen primary account." Marcus straightened his spine, the shock evaporating from his features, replaced by a grim, professional determination. The trap had been fully articulated, and he understood his role perfectly. "I want it done publicly," I continued, my eyes fixed on the condensation dripping down the glass. "I want Sylvia and Evelyn to watch their gracious host fail a basic credit check in the middle of a luxury spa. And when they demand to speak to the owner to resolve the humiliation, you will bring them directly to my office." "Understood completely," Marcus replied, pulling a sleek communication radio from his inner jacket pocket. I turned away from the pavilion, leaving the whispers in the steam behind me. The narrative of the inadequate drifting daughter had just expired, and the hammer was suspended directly above their heads, waiting for gravity to take over. The air in the Grand Pavilion lobby was heavy with humidity and the faint, sweet scent of crushed botanical extracts. I stood at the center of the imported Italian marble floor, the sharp cut of my charcoal bespoke suit providing a stark contrast to the organic flowing lines of the architecture. Marcus stood to my left, his posture perfectly rigid, radiating the quiet authority of a seasoned executive. Elena positioned herself to my right, holding a polished silver tray she had retrieved from the concierge station. We did not speak. The silence in the antechamber was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, distant sound of cascading water from the thermal plunges. We were a tribunal, waiting for the accused to arrive. I watched the heavy frosted doors of the Eucalyptus steam chamber. Behind that glass, the VIP status verification protocol was currently underway. The front desk director, a highly capable woman named Sarah, had entered the sanctuary 2 minutes prior. She was executing a procedure that, in the upper echelons of American society, equated to a public execution. In circles where net worth dictates human value, a declined credit card is not viewed as a simple banking error. It is perceived as a fatal moral failing. It is a sudden, terrifying stripping of the armor that protects the elite from the indignities of normal life. My mother had spent her entire adult life cultivating an image of impenetrable financial security. She married a man with a respectable corporate salary, managed his investments with ruthless social climbing, and firmly believed that her proximity to country club wealth made her inherently superior to the working class. She raised me with the constant reminder that manual labor and service industry jobs were for people lacking ambition. She never understood that the true titans of modern capitalism do not wear golf clothes on a Tuesday afternoon. They wear perfectly tailored suits, they own the real estate beneath the golf course, and they employ people exactly like her husband. A muffled exclamation pierced the heavy acoustic dampening of the glass doors. It was Diana, her voice raised in a pitch of frantic disbelief. Even through the thick panes, I could hear the sharp, defensive cadence of a woman desperately trying to salvage her dignity in front of her wealthiest peers. Sylvia and Evelyn, women who commanded vast family fortunes, were currently watching their gracious host fail to authorize a basic luxury transaction. The safety net I had built for her medical emergencies was locked tight. Her primary accounts were frozen. The grand illusion she had spent decades constructing was shattering in real time. The frosted glass doors suddenly thrust open, hitting the rubber wall stoppers with a heavy thud. A thick cloud of aromatic steam rolled out into the cool lobby, followed immediately by my mother. Diana marched out of the vapor, her face flushed a dark mottled crimson. Her pristine white waffle weave robe was tied haphazardly around her waist, completely ruining her normally immaculate presentation. She was clutching her heavy metal platinum card in one trembling hand, her knuckles white with strain. Lauren trailed right behind her, looking deeply uncomfortable, while Brad brought up the rear, his previous arrogance entirely extinguished by the escalating chaos. Sylvia and Evelyn emerged last, keeping a calculated physical distance from the Holland family. The socialites wore expressions of polite horror, the specific look the ultra-wealthy adopt when someone adjacent to them suddenly falls out of their tax bracket. "This is an absolute outrage," Diana demanded, spinning around to yell back into the steam chamber at the front desk director. "I demand to speak to the general manager immediately. My financial institutions do not decline transactions. Your archaic terminal is obviously malfunctioning, and I will be contacting my attorneys regarding this unprecedented humiliation." Sarah, the director, stepped out of the fog with perfect serene composure. "I apologize for the inconvenience, madam. However, our merchant systems are operating flawlessly. The primary holding account attached to your profile has placed a hard restriction on all outgoing capital. We simply require an alternative method of payment to allow your party to continue utilizing the restricted tier amenities." Diana let out a sharp, breathless sound of sheer fury. She pivoted away from Sarah, intending to storm toward the main reception desk to escalate the conflict. That was the exact moment her eyes landed on me. I stood precisely 30 feet away, blocking the primary exit path. I did not have the $20 coffee gift card she had given me. I was not wearing the cheap cotton robe she had deemed appropriate for my station. I was encased in immaculate dark wool, flanked by the two highest-ranking executives on the mountain. For a fraction of a second, genuine confusion washed over my mother's face. Her brain desperately tried to reconcile the image of the daughter she continuously belittled with the commanding, powerful figure standing before her. But arrogance is a blinding force. Rather than recognizing the catastrophic shift in the power dynamic, Diana's mind defaulted to her most comfortable habit. She assumed I was making a mistake, and worse, that I was embarrassing her. Calliope Diana hissed, storming across the marble floor toward me, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. "What on earth are you doing back here? You are completely out of uniform. Did you seriously steal a suit to sneak into the administrative corridors? Are you trying to get us kicked off the property? Get back to the public lodge right now before management sees you and calls security. We are already dealing with a massive billing error, and I cannot have you jeopardizing our reputation any further with your pathetic little stunts." She reached out, intending to grab my forearm and physically drag me toward the service exit. She never made contact. Before Diana could close the final distance between us, Elena stepped forward smoothly, interposing her body between my mother and myself. The movement was flawlessly executed, a masterclass in aggressive hospitality. Elena did not raise her voice. She did not break her pleasant expression. She simply executed a deep, perfect curtsy, bowing her head in a display of absolute deference. Diana froze mid-stride. Her outstretched hand dropped to her side. The breath caught in her throat as she stared at the head concierge. Elena straightened her posture, lifting the polished silver tray directly toward me. Resting in the center of the metal surface was a heavy, matte black master keycard engraved with the resort crest in silver foil. Miss Holland Elena announced, her voice carrying a bright, ringing clarity that echoed off the vaulted stone ceilings. Your private owner's suite in the penthouse is fully prepared. The quarterly revenue reports and the updated vendor contracts have been placed on your desk for review. The entire executive staff is currently lined up in the main atrium to formally greet you upon your return to the property. The silence that crashed down upon the pavilion lobby was heavier than the steam. It was a suffocating, absolute void of sound. Sylvia gasped loudly, bringing a manicured hand up to cover her mouth. Evelyn took a slow, stunned step backward, her eyes darting frantically between my mother and me. Lauren let out a faint, strangled whimpering sound, suddenly realizing that the luxury silk boutique robe she was wearing belonged to the woman she had spent the morning mocking. Brad looked as if the oxygen had been forcibly extracted from his lungs. His face drained of all color as his calculating mind finally processed the math. He had just insulted the financial intelligence of the person who controlled the very ground he was standing on, the person who held the fate of his extravagant wedding in her hands. But the true devastation was concentrated entirely in my mother's face. Diana's jaw dropped. The heavy metal platinum card slipped from her nerveless fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp, ringing clatter that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. She looked past me, staring down the long corridor leading toward the main atrium. Through the glass double doors, she could see them. Dozens of employees, masseuses in pristine uniforms, thermal attendants holding fresh towels, culinary managers in their crisp whites, and the entire front desk security apparatus. Over 50 highly trained professionals stood in perfect silent alignment, waiting to bow their heads respectfully to the drifting, useless daughter. The reality of her situation descended with crushing, inescapable weight. The luxury she had paraded, the status she had wielded, the very air she was breathing inside this mountain sanctuary had all been provided, financed, and owned by me. The systemic minimization of my intelligence had been a catastrophic miscalculation. Every condescending remark, every assigned chore, and every stolen dollar from the emergency fund had been meticulously recorded by the architect of this empire. Diana slowly turned her head, bringing her wide, horrified eyes back to mine. Her lips parted, struggling to form a coherent word, but her vocal cords refused to function. The matriarch was utterly destroyed, completely dismantled by the revelation that she was merely a guest in my house. I looked my mother dead in the eye. I did not smile, I did not gloat. The dynamic between us had shifted permanently, and I delivered the final blow with the cold, calm, and utterly dominant certainty of an apex predator closing its jaw. I did not sneak in, Mother, I stated quietly, letting the words slice cleanly through the silent air. I built the building. Now, if you cannot provide a valid payment method for your luxury upgrades, I suggest you pack your bags. Checkout is at 3. The metallic clatter of my mother's dropped credit card echoed through the damp air, lingering long after the initial impact. Diana stared at the piece of plastic resting on the wet marble, unable to comprehend that her ultimate weapon of social dominance was entirely useless. For decades, that platinum card had served as her impenetrable shield against consequence. It bought silence, compliance, and respect from everyone she deemed inferior. Now, it was just a piece of useless trash littering my floor. A strained, unnatural sound escaped Diana's throat. It was a laugh, hollow and frantic, vibrating with barely suppressed terror. She turned her head toward her wealthy companions, Sylvia and Evelyn, desperately trying to construct a narrative that would save her pride in front of the local elite. This is an absurd practical joke, Diana declared, her voice pitching an octave higher than its usual cultured resonance. My daughter has a very strange sense of humor, ladies. She must have convinced the local staff to play along for a laugh. Calliope, enough of this theatrical nonsense right now. You are making your sister extremely uncomfortable and wasting everyone's valuable afternoon. She looked toward Marcus and Elena, expecting the employees to drop their professional facade, apologize profusely, and return to fetching fresh towels. She anticipated the natural order of her universe to forcefully reassert itself. Instead, the executive team remained rigidly composed. Marcus adjusted his tailored cuffs, his expression carved from the very stone that lined the pavilion walls. Elena maintained her flawless, upright posture, the silver tray still held perfectly steady in her grasp. Not a single staff member lined up in the grand atrium down the hall broke their respectful, silent alignment. The unwavering loyalty of my workforce struck Diana with the kinetic force of a physical blow. Lauren stepped forward, her posture stiffening with defensive indignation. My sister had spent her entire existence operating under the assumption that I was merely a biological footnote to her own spectacular narrative. Lauren was the quintessential golden child, a former regional pageant winner who had seamlessly transitioned into the role of a pampered trophy fiancé. She viewed my existence as a convenient, dull background against which her own vibrant achievements could shine brighter. "Why are you doing this?" Lauren demanded, crossing her arms tightly over her damp swimsuit to ward off the chill. "Why are you pretending to own this place and humiliating Mom in front of her important friends? You are just a mid-level consultant. You arrange schedules and fetch coffee for corporate retreats. You absolutely do not have the capital to purchase a ski lodge, let alone a massive property like Aura Alpine. Stop embarrassing us before management calls security." I did not raise my voice to meet her rising shrill panic. I never argue with individuals who remain fiercely committed to their own fabricated delusions. I simply enforce the boundaries they choose to continuously ignore. I extended 2 fingers toward the head concierge, a silent, universally understood gesture of command. "Elena, please provide Mrs. Holland with the updated financial folio." Elena moved with fluid, practiced grace, retrieving a thick, embossed folder from beneath the polished silver tray. She extended the heavy document directly toward my mother. Diana hesitated, her manicured hands visibly shaking in the cool air, before finally snatching the heavy paper from the concierge's grip. I kept my tone clinical and detached, addressing my family exactly as if they were delinquent corporate accounts during a hostile merger. "Since there was a regrettable mix-up regarding your hydrotherapy reservations today, I have taken the liberty of auditing your entire stay," I explained smoothly. "The complimentary VIP status originally attached to your family profile was a courtesy extended exclusively by the ownership. Because that courtesy was met with deliberate theft from our shared medical emergency fund and public defamation of my personal character, the status has been permanently and irrevocably revoked." Diana's eyes darted frantically across the itemized list, her face completely draining of whatever color remained from the steam chamber. "Every luxury amenity you have consumed since your arrival is now billing directly to your personal backup credit card at peak retail pricing," I continued, enunciating every single syllable with absolute devastating clarity. "The panoramic penthouse upgrade you stole from me yesterday, the $400 silk boutique robe Lauren is currently wearing to dry off, the imported hot stones, the private reserve wine cellar tasting, and the exclusive $2,000 wellness circuit you just interrupted. Your total outstanding balance currently exceeds $25,000, and your primary banking routing number remains securely locked." A suffocating, oppressive silence descended upon the group. Evelyn and Sylvia exchanged a loaded, profoundly horrified glance. In their ultra-exclusive social circle, financial insolvency is treated like a highly contagious disease, and they were suddenly very eager to physically distance themselves from the infected host. Brad decided this was his perfect moment to bravely intervene. My prospective brother-in-law possessed the distinct, entirely unearned confidence of a man who firmly believed a bright smile and a tailored designer vest could solve any structural deficit. He stepped squarely between me and Lauren, holding his hands up in a patronizing, placating gesture. "Let us just take a deep breath here," Callie Brad said, deploying his most practiced, soothing salesman cadence. "Emotions are running incredibly high right now. Families fight, we all get it, but there is absolutely no need to ruin the whole weekend over a minor misunderstanding. Why do we not go back to your office, have a strong drink, and sort out these invoices like reasonable adults? We are still planning a massive, expensive wedding here next autumn after all. We are good for the money, I promise you." I looked at Brad, genuinely marveling at the sheer, breathtaking audacity of his sudden pivot. 10 short minutes ago, he had cornered me by the outdoor fire pit, sweating profusely through his expensive winter clothes, begging me to defraud my employer because he was drowning in desperate margin calls. Now he was attempting to leverage that same non-existent wealth to temporarily pacify me in front of his oblivious fiancée. He was foolishly trying to use a burning bridge as a bargaining chip. I shifted my gaze to Lauren, who was watching her partner with absolute unwavering devotion, completely unaware of the catastrophic financial ruin waiting for her at the altar. "Are you genuinely still planning a massive wedding, Brad Plus?" I asked, allowing a razor-thin edge of dark amusement to enter my steady voice. "Because less than an hour ago, you cornered me on the viewing terrace and explicitly admitted that your capital is completely tied up in an illiquid technology venture. You confessed you could not afford the initial deposit for this venue. In fact, you aggressively demanded that I use my supposed lower-tier position to waive the $90,000 buyout fee entirely, simply because you are currently operating on a severe negative cash flow margin." Brad stopped breathing entirely. His jaw locked tight, and a terrified, desperate gleam appeared in his wide eyes. Lauren whipped her head around to stare directly at her fiancé. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. "Brad, what on earth is she talking about right now? You promised me your investment firm had a record-breaking fourth quarter. You explicitly said the wedding budget was completely uncapped." Brad stammered, raising his trembling hands toward Lauren. "Babe, listen to me. It is just a temporary liquidity issue. She is deliberately twisting my words to upset you." "He begged me to steal from this resort because he is broke, Lauren," I stated flatly, severing his pathetic, floundering excuse with surgical precision. "He does not have the money for your dream reception, and he certainly does not have the liquid cash to cover his portion of the outstanding balance on that printed folio. You are marrying a man whose entire identity is financed on fragile credit he can no longer access." The multiple layers of complex family deception unraveled entirely, falling apart dramatically in the middle of my pristine, eucalyptus-scented lobby. The gorgeous aesthetic of ultimate mountain luxury contrasted sharply with the profound, ugly reality of their toxic entitlement. They had arrived at my sanctuary expecting to be treated as visiting royalty, assuming their shared bloodline granted them unlimited, consequence-free access to my hard-earned resources. Instead, they were standing, shivering in wet bathing suits, brutally exposed as frauds to the very high society peers they desperately worshipped. Diana clutched the printed folio tightly to her chest, her breathing shallow and erratic. She looked entirely broken, a dethroned queen stripped of her imaginary kingdom, standing amid the smoking wreckage of her own boundless arrogance. Sylvia finally broke the unbearable tension, clearing her throat delicately. "Evelyn, I strongly believe we should return to our private rooms. This appears to be a deeply private family matter that does not concern us." The two wealthy socialites turned and walked swiftly toward the guest elevators, abandoning my mother without offering a second glance. Their rapid departure finalized Diana's ultimate social execution. She was no longer a respected peer in their eyes. She was merely a tragic, cautionary tale. I looked at the three people who had spent my entire life attempting to minimize my potential. They had absolutely nothing left to say. Their cruel weapons were gone. Their precarious finances were brutally exposed. They were completely and utterly at my mercy. I turned my back on them. I did not wait around for an apology because forced apologies extracted under the heavy threat of financial ruin are inherently meaningless. I began walking down the long, brilliantly illuminated corridor toward the grand atrium my executive team, falling seamlessly into step right behind me. The assembled staff maintained their respectful, perfect silence, parting gracefully like water to let me pass through. I left my shattered family standing completely alone in the damp antechamber, staring blankly at a massive bill they could not afford, suddenly very aware that the cold mountain air was about to get much more unforgiving. But as the sleek elevator doors slid shut to carry me back to the safety of the penthouse, my secure phone buzzed sharply in my jacket pocket. It was an urgent alert from my corporate legal department. Diana, desperate to regain her lost leverage and punish me for her humiliation, had just attempted to place a retaliatory emergency lien on our childhood family home. She intended to forcibly sell the estate to pay her mounting debts, completely unaware that I had quietly purchased the underlying mortgage 3 years ago. The conflict was was rapidly evolving, and a highly destructive new battlefield had just been drawn. The evening sky over the Rocky Mountains transitioned into a bruised purple canvas as I sat inside the executive penthouse. My private suite occupied the entire top floor of Aura Alpine. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered an unobstructed view of the jagged peaks, while the interior space projected the cold, undeniable weight of institutional power. I sat behind a massive desk carved from a single slab of reclaimed oak, my hands resting lightly over an open leather-bound ledger. The ambient lighting cast long shadows across the hardwood floor, perfectly setting the stage for the audit I was about to conduct. At exactly 8 o'clock, the private elevator chimed. The polished steel doors slid open, delivering my family directly into the center of my domain. Marcus escorted them out of the carriage, his expression completely blank, before turning on his heel and retreating into the corridor. Diana stepped into the penthouse first. She had changed out of her damp swimsuit and was now wearing a rigid designer dress, clearly attempting to reassert her matriarchal authority through sheer sartorial presence. Lauren followed closely behind her, clutching a small evening bag like a defensive shield, while Brad lagged in the rear, his eyes darting nervously around the sprawling luxury of the room. He was a man actively calculating the net worth of the furniture, realizing just how vastly outmatched he truly was. Diana marched across the expansive rugs, stopping a few feet away from my desk. She lifted her chin, attempting to summon the familiar, condescending tone she had utilized my entire life. She demanded to know exactly how I managed to pull off this elaborate stunt. She insisted that my little charade had gone far enough and that I needed to explain my relationship with the actual owners of this facility before she contacted her legal representation. She spoke rapidly, her words bleeding together in a frantic attempt to control a narrative that had already slipped through her fingers. She pointed a trembling finger at me, declaring that I was acting completely out of turn and severely damaging the family reputation. I did not interrupt her spiraling monologue. I simply let the silence in the room absorb her frantic energy. When she finally ran out of breath, I looked down at the ledger resting on the oak surface. I bypassed the emotional manipulation entirely. Family arguments thrive on elevated heart rates and defensive shouting, but corporate audits rely strictly on documented evidence. I slid a thick stack of printed bank statements across the smooth wood, pushing them until they rested directly under my mother's gaze. I instructed her to look at the routing numbers highlighted in yellow. Diana hesitated, her defensive posture wavering slightly before she leaned forward to examine the pages. The documents detailed the transaction history of the Holland Family Emergency Fund. I watched her eyes track across the columns, observing the precise moment she realized her secret had been completely exposed. Her righteous anger evaporated instantly, replaced by the terrifying chill of absolute accountability. You stole from the medical fund I built for you to buy status at a resort I own to impress women you do not even like, I stated softly, letting the undeniable reality of her actions settle into the quiet room. You raided the Capitol designed to keep a roof over your head during a healthcare crisis, just so you could purchase a panoramic penthouse suite and pretend you belonged to an elite social echelon. You committed financial fraud against your own safety net, entirely unaware that the person auditing the ledger was the exact same person who deposited those funds in the first place. Diana opened her mouth to speak, but only a wet, stammering sound emerged. She looked at Lauren for support, but my sister had stepped backward, her face pale as she stared at the banking documents. Brad remained completely silent, suddenly very interested in the texture of his shoes. My mother tried to formulate a defense, whispering something about needing to maintain appearances and how I simply did not understand the pressure of her social obligations. She claimed the withdrawal was merely a temporary loan, and she always intended to replace the capital before anyone noticed. I did not allow her to hide behind the flimsy excuse of social pressure. I systematically dissected her financial hypocrisy piece by piece. I reminded her of the countless times she had mocked my career choices at the country club, proudly declaring to her wealthy peers that I was a drifting disappointment. I then pulled a secondary file from my drawer and opened it. I read aloud the direct wire transfers I had authorized over the past 3 years. I detailed the property tax payments I had quietly covered when her husband made poor investments. I listed the country club membership dues I had subsidized through an anonymous trust so she would not lose her precious precious social standing. I even produced the receipts for the luxury vehicles parked in her driveway, vehicles she claimed were dividends from her husband's brilliant market strategies. The fake success you have spent years belittling has been quietly subsidizing your entire existence. I explained, my voice remaining as calm and steady as a ticking clock. Your entire reality is a leveraged asset, and I am the primary shareholder. Every time you insulted my intelligence in public, I went home and paid your mortgage. Every time you told your friends I was unemployable, I balanced your checking account. You have been living on a financial respirator I personally installed, and today you finally decided to unplug it yourself. The revelation stripped my mother of her most potent weapon. For decades, Diana had utilized shame to keep me compliant. She had weaponized my supposed inadequacy to elevate her own status. But shame requires a willing participant, and the paper trail resting on the oak desk proved that she was the one operating on an empty balance sheet. She had nothing left to leverage. My absolute unwavering calm terrified my family more than any screaming match ever could. They realized they were not dealing with a wounded daughter seeking their elusive approval. They were negotiating with a creditor who had just called in a massive unpayable debt. Lauren finally broke the heavy silence, taking a hesitant step forward. She asked in a small, trembling voice what was going to happen next. She looked at Brad, hoping he would step in and apply his financial expertise to save them. But Brad was staring out the window, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the wealth he had foolishly insulted. Before I could address my sister, the intercom on my desk chimed softly. Marcus announced that our legal counsel had just transmitted the emergency document I requested. I tapped the screen projecting the newly arrived file onto the large digital monitor mounted behind my desk. Diana looked up at the screen, her eyes widening in renewed horror. Earlier that afternoon, immediately following her humiliation in the spa lobby, she had made a desperate, panicked phone call. She had attempted to place a retaliatory emergency lien on our childhood family home, intending to forcibly liquidate the estate to pay her newly acquired resort debts and punish me in the process. She assumed the house was solely in her name. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, watching the last remnants of her arrogance shatter into dust. You tried to put a lien on the house to cover your outstanding invoices, I noted, observing her posture crumple. That was a highly aggressive maneuver, Mother. Unfortunately, you cannot place a lien on a property you do not actually own. When Dad almost lost the house 3 years ago, I did not just pay the overdue balance. I quietly purchased the underlying mortgage through one of my holding companies to prevent the bank from foreclosing. You are currently attempting to foreclose on your own landlord. The trap had snapped completely shut, locking them inside a fortress of their own creation. The cold mountain wind howled against the glass walls, drowning out the shallow, panicked breathing of the people standing before me, perfectly setting the stage for the eviction notice I was about to serve. The digital projection of the mortgage document bathed the penthouse office in a pale blue glow. The undeniable proof of my ownership hung suspended on the massive screen, completely suffocating the remaining oxygen in the room. Lauren stared at the illuminated text, her eyes widening as her brain finally processed the catastrophic collapse of her pampered reality. The structural integrity of her privileged life was disintegrating right before her eyes. Stripped of her usual arrogance, my sister immediately defaulted to her oldest and most effective survival mechanism. She began to cry. These were not the messy, unpredictable tears of genuine grief. They were the highly curated, photogenic tears of a former regional pageant contestant. Lauren learned at a remarkably young age that water was an incredibly effective solvent for personal accountability. Whenever she missed a high school curfew, overspent her monthly allowance, or damaged a family vehicle, she wept. Diana always rushed to comfort her, instantly framing my sister as a delicate victim of unfortunate circumstances. I, conversely, never shed a tear when I failed a mathematics exam or scraped my knees on the pavement. I analyzed my mistakes in silence. My parents interpreted my natural stoicism as severe emotional coldness, constantly punishing me for failing to perform the expected dramatic labor. Lauren stepped hesitantly toward my massive oak desk, elegantly wiping a pristine droplet from her contoured cheek. She pleaded with me, her voice trembling with manufactured distress, asking why I was doing this to our family. She claimed I was completely ruining our special sisterly bonding trip, intentionally transforming a beautiful weekend celebration into a cruel, vindictive nightmare. She reached her hand across the polished wood desperately, trying to invoke a shared childhood connection that had never actually existed. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not soften my posture or lower my gaze. The generous window for emotional subsidies had permanently expired. I reached into the heavy brass tray resting on the corner of my desk and retrieved a crisp sheet of heavyweight parchment. I slid the document across the smooth wooden surface until it stopped mere inches from her trembling fingers. The paper was a fully itemized invoice. It meticulously detailed every single ounce of luxury they had aggressively consumed over the past 48 hours. The columns tracked the panoramic penthouse upgrades, the expensive botanical wraps, the imported silk boutique garments, and the private reserve wine tastings. The bottom line was printed in stark, unforgiving black ink. The total balance stood at exactly $14,200. Diana saw the staggering numerical figure and gasped loudly. Her maternal instincts, usually entirely dormant when it came to my well-being, suddenly flared into frantic defensive action. She slammed her manicured hand flat against the desk, her heavy diamond rings striking the oak with a sharp crack. "Family does not invoice family," she declared, her voice cracking under the immense psychological strain of her collapsing social illusion. She parroted the phrase like a sacred incantation, praying the ancient rules of domestic guilt would somehow shield her from financial ruin. I met her panicked gaze with absolute, terrifying stillness. "Family does not steal from family, Mother," I replied softly, my tone devoid of any rising anger. "Consider this a necessary correction of the ledger. You treated my private medical trust as your personal slush fund to buy temporary status at a resort I own, desperately trying to impress wealthy women you do not even genuinely like. I am simply treating your luxury vacation as a taxable event." Brad had slowly retreated toward the expansive glass wall, desperately attempting to blend into the shadows of the room. It was a completely futile effort. He was the next individual on my comprehensive audit schedule. Brad possessed a severe, untreated addiction to performative generosity. He was the specific type of insecure man who loudly purchased rounds of premium spirits for strangers at crowded bars, ensuring everyone recognized him as a wealthy benefactor, while secretly praying his credit utilization limit had not been breached. His entire social identity relied heavily upon the fragile, temporary illusion of endless liquidity. He bought respect because he lacked the fundamental character to earn it. I shifted my attention away from my mother and focused directly on my prospective brother-in-law. I informed him that the primary concierge desk had just finalized his individual beverage folio for the afternoon. He had spent his time sitting by the grand fire pit, ordering our most exclusive reserve bourbon for himself, and several random guests in the lounge acting as the ultimate sophisticated host. I watched his throat swallow hard as I recited the data. His personal bar tab currently sat at $1,800. I paused, letting the silence stretch out before delivering the final, devastating piece of operational intelligence. I told Brad that his primary credit card had violently declined at the merchant terminal exactly 20 minutes ago. The rapid succession of targeted financial blows left the three of them entirely immobilized. I leaned back in my high-backed leather chair, taking a quiet moment to survey the smoking wreckage of their manufactured superiority. Lauren was staring at her fiancé with undisguised, profound horror, finally realizing the man she intended to marry was entirely broke. Brad was staring at his expensive leather shoes, thoroughly humiliated and exposed as a massive fraud. Diana was staring blankly at the itemized invoice permanently trapped inside a cold steel cage built entirely from her own boundless entitlement. Lauren managed to whisper a broken question, asking why I had kept my ownership a total secret for all these years. She accused me of being deeply vindictive, suggesting I had maliciously plotted their tragic downfall from the very beginning. I shook my head slowly, rejecting her desperate attempt to paint me as the villain of her story. I explained that my profound silence was never born of malice or petty revenge. It was a calculated act of pure self-preservation. I knew exactly how their minds operated. If I had publicly announced my massive success the day I purchased this mountain property, they would not have celebrated my achievement with genuine pride. they would have immediately viewed my hard-earned assets as a natural extension of their own collective wealth. I carefully detailed their predictable behavioral patterns. They would have demanded free seasonal vacations, requested endless uncollateralized loans, and expected me to fully fund their extravagant, unsustainable lifestyles without offering a single word of sincere support in return. I reminded them that during the entire 3 years I lived in Denver, working 80-hour weeks to build this hospitality empire from scratch, they never once called to ask how my heart was doing. They never inquired about my personal struggles, my physical exhaustion, or my professional triumphs. They only ever asked what I could do for them. They demanded I run their tedious errands, manage their complex travel schedules, and quietly absorb their endless casual insults. They required a subservient assistant to bolster their fragile egos, not an independent daughter to love. I hid my kingdom because I knew the locust would inevitably come to devour the harvest. The crisp, printed invoice sat perfectly still on the desk between us, radiating danger like an unexploded bomb. The ambient temperature in the penthouse seemed to plummet as I leaned forward to deliver my final, non-negotiable terms. The established rules of engagement were now extremely simple. I was closing the account. I gave them a definitive binary choice. They could pay the $14,200 balance in full, using legitimate verified funds, and quietly vacate the premises by sunrise tomorrow morning. If they chose that path, they would walk away with nothing but their bruised egos. Alternatively, if they refused or failed to settle the outstanding account, I would instruct my corporate legal counsel to contact the local mountain authorities immediately. I would formally report the unauthorized wire transfers, officially pressing felony embezzlement charges regarding the theft from the Joint Medical Trust Fund. The sheer gravity of the ultimatum crushed the last remaining traces of defiance from the room. Jail time or absolute bankruptcy. Cornered animals, however, rarely surrender gracefully when facing total destruction. Instead of uniting to face the crisis as a cohesive family unit, the immense pressure instantly fractured their fragile, superficial alliances. Brad, desperate to save himself from impending criminal accessory charges and total financial ruin, suddenly raised his head. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my mother, preparing to eagerly trade her legal freedom for his own pathetic survival. The sun breached the jagged horizon of the Rocky Mountains exactly at 7 in the morning. It cast a blinding golden light across the frost-covered pines and illuminated the expansive glass panes of the primary dining room at Aura Alpine. I sat alone at a corner table overlooking the valley. My posture was relaxed. My charcoal suit from the previous evening had been replaced by a tailored navy blazer and a crisp linen shirt. I held a porcelain cup of dark espresso, feeling the warm ceramic against my palms. The resort functioned perfectly around me. The culinary staff moved with silent grace, replacing silver chafing dishes and pouring fresh juices for the early rising guests. I was enjoying the profound tranquility that follows a massive structural collapse. Last night, I delivered an ultimatum that offered my family a binary choice between financial restitution or criminal prosecution. I fully expected them to flee under the cover of darkness. I underestimated my mother and her terrifying capacity for cognitive dissonance. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open. Diana walked through the entrance. She did not look like a woman who had just been threatened with felony embezzlement charges. She was impeccably dressed in a pearl-white cashmere sweater and tailored slate trousers. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her expression was arranged into a sickeningly sweet, radiant smile designed for public consumption. She navigated the room with the practiced elegance of a politician working a campaign trail, nodding politely to a passing waiter before charting a direct course toward my corner table. She was deploying her final, most desperate tactical maneuver. When domination fails, the parasite attempts assimilation. Diana pulled out the velvet chair opposite me and sat down gracefully. She folded her manicured hands on the pristine white tablecloth. She leaned forward, projecting an aura of intimate maternal affection. "Good morning, sweetheart," Diana said, pitching her voice into a gentle, melodic register. "I hope you slept well. I spent the entire night thinking about everything we discussed in your beautiful office." I did not reply. I took a slow sip of my espresso, allowing the bitter liquid to sharpen my focus. I watched her operate. I realize that we have been looking at this situation from entirely the wrong perspective, Diana continued, her eyes shining with manufactured enthusiasm. We are a family. Families have disagreements, but they also have immense collective power. I am incredibly proud of what you have built here, Calliope. It is a stunning achievement. But you are hiding your light under a bushel. You are operating this massive property all by yourself, and that is simply too much burden for a young woman to carry without proper guidance. She paused, waiting for me to display a flicker of gratitude. When my expression remained entirely blank, she pressed forward, revealing the core of her gentrification strategy. I think we should rebrand the property, Diana announced softly, leaning closer across the table. We could position Aura Alpine as a premier Holland family enterprise. Think about the marketing potential. I have decades of experience navigating high society. I know the exact clientele you are trying to attract. I could act as your official brand ambassador. I could bring my entire country club network up to the mountain every single season. We could host exclusive charity galas. We could merge your operational talent with my social capital. We can sweep all of that unfortunate ugliness from yesterday under the rug and move forward as a united front. It was a breathtaking performance. It was the ultimate offer of conditional love, cleanly packaged as a corporate merger. We will finally accept you, she was saying, if you allow us to own you. She wanted to slap the Holland family name onto the side of a building I constructed with my own blood and sweat, effectively claiming credit for my labor in exchange for sparing me her future hostility. This tactic was a familiar chapter in my mother's playbook. 30 years ago, when my father secured a minor vice president role at a regional logistics firm, Diana immediately joined the Corporate Wives Committee. Within 6 months, she had convinced the entire neighborhood that she was the primary architect of his promotion. She thrives on proximity to power, extracting equity from the achievements of others while contributing absolutely nothing to the foundational labor. Now facing the total evaporation of her wealth, she was trying to gentrify my trauma. She wanted to pave over the years of emotional neglect and financial abuse, erecting a shiny new billboard that declared us a happy, successful family business. I set my porcelain cup down on the matching saucer. The ceramic made a soft, decisive click against the table. You are offering me a joint venture, I said, keeping my volume low to maintain the serene atmosphere of the dining room. Exactly, Diana beamed, interpreting my calm demeanor as compliance. A mother and daughter partnership. It would be a beautiful story for the local press. I looked out the window at the snow-capped peaks, then brought my gaze back to her perfectly contoured face. That is a fascinating proposal, I replied smoothly. However, a successful corporate partnership requires alignment of vision and mutual respect. I find it difficult to reconcile your offer to be my brand ambassador with the conversation you held in the eucalyptus steam room yesterday afternoon. Diana flinched, the radiant smile fractured slightly around the edges. I do not need a brand ambassador who firmly believes her daughter sneaked in through the delivery entrance just to steal a free shower, I stated, slicing through her sweet facade with the cold steel of reality. I do not need a public relations representative who actively assassinate my character to impress women she secretly despises. You are attempting to negotiate a settlement using currency you do not possess. You have no social capital left, Mother. Sylvia and Evelyn checked out of the resort at 6 o'clock this morning. They paid their own balances and departed before the sun came up, specifically to avoid being associated with your catastrophic financial collapse. Diana gasped sharply, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. The illusion of her grand social rescue mission disintegrated instantly. Her high society peers had abandoned ship, leaving her entirely isolated on the mountain. The business is registered as a limited liability company, I continued, my voice carrying the final, unyielding authority of a presiding judge. The operating agreement bears one signature, mine. There will be no Holland family enterprise. There will be no rebranding. I am not offering you a board seat, and I am certainly not offering you absolution. I reached into the inner pocket of my navy blazer and withdrew a small white card. I placed it on the table between us. It was not another invoice. It was an internal hospitality profile printout. This is your updated status in our centralized booking system, I explained, tapping the paper with my index finger. When you manage to pay the $14,000 invoice currently sitting on your account, you will be permitted to leave the premises without a police escort. However, moving forward, your profile has been permanently flagged. You are officially listed as a Do Not Book client across the entire Alpine Hospitality network. A Do Not Book designation is the ultimate excommunication in the luxury resort industry. It means her name, her credit cards, and her phone numbers are permanently blocked from securing a reservation. It is a digital banishment. In American society, where access to exclusive spaces is the purest metric of human worth, being blacklisted from a premier property is a fatal social wound. The family asset illusion died right there at the breakfast table, suffocated by the heavy blanket of undeniable legal and operational reality. Diana stared at the white card, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw breath in the thin mountain air. She had nothing left to bargain with. She had no money, no friends, no leverage, and no daughter. She was entirely bankrupt in every conceivable metric. I picked up my espresso and finished the last drop. The transaction was complete, but as I stood up from the table preparing to walk away and leave her to her ruin, the heavy dining room doors crashed open. Brad stumbled into the restaurant, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat, dragging a rolling suitcase that looked like it had been hastily packed in total darkness. The ultimate coward had decided to make his move, and the resulting collision was about to tear the remaining fabric of this family completely apart. The frantic squeaking of rubber wheels against polished hardwood shattered the morning tranquility. Brad hauled a massive rolling suitcase through the dining hall entrance, his designer jacket wrinkled and stained with nervous perspiration. He was executing a classic coward's retreat, desperately attempting to abandon the sinking ship before the final billing cycle processed. His eyes darted wildly toward the valet exit. He planned to leave my sister stranded with a $14,000 invoice while he escaped back to Denver. However, his clumsy getaway attempt suffered a fatal interruption. The heavy wooden doors swung open a second time, revealing Lauren. She wore a rumpled silk tracksuit, her complexion blotchy from an entire night spent crying over her shattered bridal fantasies. She spotted her fleeing fiancé and froze, the tragic realization washing over her features. Lauren has always viewed existence as a continuous theatrical production, where she serves as the undisputed star. During our childhood, my parents heavily subsidized her various pageant campaigns, eagerly purchasing expensive gowns and private coaching sessions. This relentless financial enabling created a deeply entitled individual who directly equated genuine affection with massive monetary expenditure. She demanded grand gestures to validate her own self-worth. Now facing the abrupt cancellation of her ultimate performance, her fragile psyche completely fractured. She marched toward Brad, her voice echoing shrilly across the empty restaurant tables. She demanded an immediate explanation. She asked why he was sneaking out like a common thief. Brad stammered, pathetically stringing together incoherent lies about sudden market fluctuations and urgent client meetings requiring his immediate presence in the city. He could not even look her in the eye. Realizing Brad offered no salvation, my sister pivoted her immense wrath directly toward me. She stormed over to my corner table, slamming her palms down onto the crisp white linen. Lauren accused me of maliciously destroying her entire future. She shrieked that my vindictive cruelty had single-handedly ruined her flawless engagement. Tears streamed down her contoured cheeks as she demanded to know where her spectacular wedding was supposed to occur, now that we were banished from the mountain property. She lamented that her partner lacked the liquid capital to secure an alternative luxury venue. I did not flinch. I refused to absorb her displaced anger. I took a slow, deliberate breath and looked up at her tear-streaked face. "You chose a man based entirely on a resume he explicitly falsified," I stated, my voice carrying the absolute certainty of a judge delivering a final verdict. "He deliberately lied about his income to secure your affection and maintain his own pathetic facade. Your entire relationship is constructed on fraudulent margin calls. I highly suggest you downsize your matrimonial expectations." Lauren recoiled as if I had physically struck her. For decades, I had served as the reliable shock absorber for her terrible life choices, quietly fixing her mistakes while she claimed all the glory. That era was permanently finished. I would no longer subsidize her delusions. Diana, witnessing her favorite child suffering a total emotional collapse, tried to intervene one last time. My mother rushed to Lauren's side, wrapping a protective arm around her trembling shoulders, begging me to show some familial mercy. She pleaded for solidarity, arguing that we needed to stick together during this terrible crisis. I completely ignored her desperate emotional manipulation. Tears and screaming tantrums held zero currency in my jurisdiction. I required documented accountability. I reached into my leather portfolio resting on the adjacent chair. I retrieved a thick manila folder and slid it smoothly across the table until it stopped directly in front of Diana. I instructed her to open the envelope. My mother hesitated, her eyes filled with profound dread before she peeled back the cardboard flap. Inside rested a formal promissory note drafted earlier that morning by my corporate legal team. The crisp document dragged our toxic family dynamic out of the shadows of emotional manipulation and squarely into the harsh, blinding light of permanent legal reality. My mother had spent her entire adult life operating comfortably within the vague, gray areas of financial responsibility. She expertly utilized maternal guilt to extract money from relatives and weaponized false affection to avoid ever repaying those debts. Formal contracts terrified her because ink leaves a permanent, undeniable record of reality. The document staring back at her detailed the exact numerical sum she had brazenly stolen from the medical emergency account. It established a ruthlessly strict repayment schedule, mandating a direct transfer of $500 on the first day of every single month. I explained the non-negotiable conditions with brutal clarity. Diana had to sign the legal agreement right now in front of multiple witnesses. If she refused to authorize the repayment plan, I would instantly dissolve the entire safety net trust fund. I would completely liquidate the capital and leave her entirely unprotected against any future healthcare disasters. Paper keeps love clean, I noted softly, drawing a direct parallel to the financial meticulousness that governed my successful enterprise. When you remove ambiguous emotions from the equation, you are left only with undeniable facts. You took capital that did not belong to you. You will return it with interest, or you will face the subsequent medical bankruptcies entirely alone. Diana stared down at the signature line. Her manicured hands trembled violently. She realized that providing her signature meant officially admitting her guilt on a binding legal document. It stripped away her ability to ever play the victim regarding this situation again. However, refusing to sign meant losing the only remaining financial lifeline she possessed in this world. She was completely trapped by her own greedy actions. With no alternative maneuvers available, she picked up the heavy brass pen resting beside the folder. She wept silently as she scrawled her name across the bottom of the page, binding herself to a decade of monthly reminders regarding her own spectacular failure. I retrieved the executed contract, checking the signature for validity before securing it safely inside my briefcase. The transaction was flawless. Next, I produced the final trespass notice generated by the Resort Security Department. I signed my own name at the bottom of the page, pressing the pen firmly into the parchment. The bold ink officially and permanently revoked their access to Aura Alpine. The emotional severing was completely finalized. It was not grounded in petty vindictiveness or chaotic rage. It was rooted in exact, unemotional accountability. I had effectively amputated a gangrenous limb to save the rest of my life. I instructed them to collect their belongings and vacate the premises within 15 minutes. I turned my attention back to my cooling espresso, considering the matter closed. But the universe has a fascinating way of delivering compound interest on bad decisions. As Brad finally grabbed the handle of his suitcase, preparing to resume his cowardly flight toward the lobby, the heavy dining room doors swung open for a third time. Two men, wearing unremarkable dark suits and carrying official leather badges, stepped into the restaurant. They were not local mountain police responding to a simple resort billing dispute. They were federal marshals. The financial wreckage was no longer contained to a domestic dispute over a stolen suite upgrade. The marshals announced a federal warrant for wire fraud and securities manipulation connected directly to Brad's Phantom Technology investments. The family asset illusion had died, but the criminal indictments were just waking up. The two federal agents moved with practiced efficiency across the dining room. They bypassed the overturned velvet chairs and rapidly approached the sweating coward clutching his designer luggage. Metallic cuffs snapped shut around his wrists. The action produced a sharp click that resonated throughout the otherwise silent restaurant. Brad offered zero physical resistance. His broad shoulders slumped forward as the imposing officers read the standard legal rights aloud. The law enforcement officials detailed severe charges regarding extensive securities fraud and international wire manipulation. Watching her wealthy future husband transform instantly into a federal prisoner finally shattered the last remaining fragile layers of my sister and her carefully constructed reality. Lauren stood completely paralyzed beside the breakfast buffet. Her mouth hung open while the marshals escorted her ruined romantic partner toward the rear exit. I did not linger to observe the pathetic departure. My business was entirely concluded. I picked up my leather portfolio and walked out of the establishment, heading toward the grand central atrium of the hotel. Heavy footsteps echoed rapidly against the polished marble floor directly behind me. Lauren had recovered from her initial shock and transitioned seamlessly into rabid hostility. From a very young age, whenever uncomfortable truths breached her curated fantasy world, she fiercely deflected all personal blame onto whoever stood closest. During her childhood beauty pageant days, if she failed to secure a crown, the judges were inherently biased. If a university course proved too difficult, the professor was tragically flawed. Accountability remained a completely foreign concept to her privileged mindset. Now, facing the absolute destruction of her high society wedding plans and severe social humiliation, she desperately needed a scapegoat. She targeted me. She chased my retreating figure into the bustling reception area. The sprawling expanse featured towering stone fireplaces and massive vaulted ceilings constructed from imported cedar. Dozens of affluent travelers milled about the space, checking their expensive winter equipment and sipping warm cider. Lauren completely abandoned any semblance of aristocratic decorum. She screamed my name loudly enough to startle a nearby family, waiting patiently for their private ski instructor. I paused near the grand staircase. My sibling closed the distance between us, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She pointed a violently shaking finger at my chest, loudly declaring that I was a profoundly selfish monster. She accused me of meticulously planning this entire tragic weekend just to publicly humiliate our family in front of my wealthy clientele. Guests paused their quiet conversations. Bellhops stopped loading heavy luggage carts. The sprawling room grew incredibly quiet as wealthy spectators turned their collective attention toward the unfolding domestic dispute. Lauren thrived on theatrical drama. She fully expected me to match her elevated volume and provide the chaotic argument she always craved. Instead, I lowered my own voice to a soft whisper. The steep drop in decibels forced her to stop shouting and lean forward just to hear my response. I maintained absolute eye contact, projecting a serene calmness that contrasted sharply with her frantic, erratic energy. It is a classic negotiation tactic. When the opponent escalates, you bring the energy down to the floor, forcing them to meet you in reality. I did not plan this vacation, Lauren, I stated clearly, keeping my tone perfectly level. Mom organized the entire itinerary. I did not book that cheap ground floor accommodation. Mom secured that specific reservation. I did not steal vital capital from the Joint Medical Trust Fund. I did not instruct your criminal boyfriend to lie about his non-existent corporate income. You are desperately attempting to assign blame for a catastrophic failure that you all engineered entirely by yourselves. I simply stood back and allowed your terrible choices to reach their natural, inevitable conclusions. I refuse to act as the shock absorber for your toxic behavior anymore. I carefully mapped out the precise sequence of their collective self-destruction. I reminded her of the endless, arrogant comments they made upon their initial arrival at the property. I detailed the condescending remarks she directed at my hardworking hospitality staff. I pointed upward toward the luxurious penthouse suites visible through the upper skylights. If you had simply treated me like a normal human being yesterday afternoon, I explained gently, if you had shown a single ounce of genuine kindness instead of instantly treating me as a prime target for your deep-seated insecurities, the current situation would look vastly different. You would currently be sitting upstairs right now. You would be drinking complimentary vintage champagne in the owner suite, enjoying full VIP status, and celebrating my hard-earned success as a family. My sister stared at me, her chest heaving as the inescapable truth slowly penetrated her stubborn defense mechanisms. She could not argue with the factual timeline I presented. Every single wound they suffered during this mountain retreat was entirely self-inflicted. They dug their own graves using shovels they brought from home. I leaned slightly closer, delivering the final emotional blow with surgical precision. "You built this massive wall between us," I whispered softly. "I just finally stopped paying for the expensive bricks." Lauren collapsed inward. Her rigid posture crumbled and thick tears began streaming down her face. However, I knew these violent sobs did not originate from a place of sincere remorse or profound personal growth. She was not crying because she realized how terribly she had abused her sibling for nearly 3 decades. She wept purely because she finally understood that her permanent free ride had officially terminated. The endless pipeline of unquestioned financial support, emergency bailouts, and unearned luxury was permanently severed. She would have to return to Denver, secure actual employment, and face her disappointed social circle completely empty-handed. I turned away from her sobbing figure and resumed my walk toward the executive elevators. I did not look back a single time. With every individual step across the polished stone floor, a heavy, agonizing weight lifted from my shoulders. It was a massive burden of guilt and obligation I had unconsciously carried for 29 years. The painful relief washed over my entire body. I was no longer the disappointing daughter or the convenient ATM machine. I was just Calliope Holland, a highly successful entrepreneur, walking confidently through a beautiful empire I built with my own 2 hands. The emotional severing felt completely finalized. I entered my private carriage and rode up to the penthouse ready to resume my daily corporate operations. But upon stepping into my suite, I discovered Marcus waiting patiently beside my oak desk. The stoic concierge manager held a formal legal document bearing a highly recognizable federal seal. He informed me that the authorities who arrested Brad had discovered something fascinating during their preliminary financial sweep. To inflate his fake investment portfolio, the fraudster desperately needed massive amounts of initial seed money. Diana had not merely stolen from the medical fund to buy spa treatments and fancy dinners. She had secretly wired 80% of that stolen capital directly into Brad and his offshore accounts, hoping he would double her illegal investment before I ever checked the ledger. The shocking revelation meant my mother was not just a petty domestic thief anymore. By moving those stolen funds across state lines into an illicit financial operation, she became an active co-conspirator in a massive federal crime. Marcus handed me the official subpoena requiring my immediate sworn testimony regarding the embezzled trust. I looked out the massive glass window, watching 2 local squad cars arrive at the front entrance below their red and blue lights, flashing brightly against the white snow. Diana thought she could outsmart everyone and secure her lavish retirement through deceit and manipulation. Now, the absolute unforgiving logic of the American justice system was arriving to collect its own terrible debt. The ultimate irony was perfect. She spent her whole life terrified of appearing poor, only to ensure she would spend her final years wearing a state-issued uniform, completely stripped of the fake wealth she worshipped. The grand central atrium of Aura Alpine breathed with the rhythmic pulse of morning commerce. Sunlight poured through the massive overhead skylights, casting long golden rectangles across the imported slate flooring. I stood silently on the 2nd-level mezzanine, leaning my forearms against the polished mahogany railing. My vantage point offered a completely unobstructed view of the sprawling reception area below. The space functioned exactly as I designed it. Wealthy patrons moved effortlessly between the gourmet coffee bar and the stone fireplaces. Bellhops, clad in immaculate forest green uniforms, glided past effortlessly, managing brass luggage carts laden with expensive leather trunks. It was a perfectly orchestrated symphony of extreme privilege and seamless hospitality. A harsh, discordant sound suddenly interrupted the smooth acoustic flow of the room. The cheap plastic wheels of a heavy suitcase scraped loudly against the pristine stone tiles. I watched as my mother and sister began their excruciatingly slow march toward the primary concierge desk. Their complimentary elite service status had been permanently revoked by my signature just 20 minutes prior. No eager staff members rushed forward to assist them with their heavy burdens. Diana struggled visibly, dragging two massive designer bags that constantly tipped over due to her frantic, uncoordinated pace. Lauren followed closely behind her face hidden behind oversized, dark sunglasses. My sibling was hauling her own oversized trunk alongside the abandoned suitcase belonging to her newly incarcerated fiancé. Brad was currently sitting in the back of a federal transport vehicle, leaving Lauren to manage the physical weight of his cowardly departure. The physical exertion stripped away the final remnants of their manufactured elegance. Diana wore a rigid cashmere coat that seemed to suffocate her in the warm, bustling environment. Her normally immaculate hair was slightly disheveled from the intense effort of wrestling the bulky luggage across the expansive lobby. They looked entirely out of place, resembling weary travelers who had accidentally wandered into a sanctuary reserved strictly for the ultra-elite. Every few steps they were forced to pause and adjust their awkward grip on the plastic handles, their faces flushed with deep embarrassment as passing guests cast curious glances their way. It was the ultimate visual payoff of their catastrophic weekend, a public walk of shame executed under the unforgiving morning sunlight. They finally reached the front desk, their chests heaving with exhaustion. Elena stood behind the polished granite counter, projecting an aura of absolute professional serenity. I had personally trained my staff to handle difficult situations with devastating politeness, weaponizing flawless customer service against any form of entitlement. Elena smiled warmly, her posture perfectly straight, and welcomed them to the checkout process. I could not hear the exact words spoken, but I could clearly read the rigid tension stiffening my mother and her rigid spine. Elena tapped a few keys on her sleek computer terminal and printed the final retail rate invoice. She slid the crisp white paper across the smooth stone surface, outlining the exact financial cost of their unauthorized luxury consumption. The document detailed the $14,200 balance. Diana stared at the paper as if it were a venomous serpent preparing to strike. She reached into her designer handbag with trembling fingers and retrieved her premium titanium credit card. She handed it to Elena with a forced smile, desperately attempting to project a casual indifference she did not actually possess. Elena processed the transaction. The merchant terminal beeped loudly, displaying a bright red "declined" notification. The primary account was completely maxed out, utterly exhausted by the relentless demands of maintaining a fake upper-class lifestyle. Elena quietly informed my mother of the insufficient funds. Diana flinched visibly, the color completely draining from her contoured cheeks. Panic set in. She began frantically digging through her purse, pulling out a chaotic assortment of secondary plastic cards. She handed 2 additional credit accounts to the concierge, begging her to split the massive balance across the different platforms. Lauren stood frozen beside her, completely unable to contribute a single dollar to the monumental debt, her own financial resources entirely dependent on the fraudulent wealth of her arrested partner. At that exact moment, a group of prominent Denver socialites strolled past the reception counter on their way to the valet station. These were women Diana had desperately courted for years, the very same individuals she had attempted to impress by stealing from my medical fund. They paused their conversation, their sharp eyes immediately drawn to the pathetic spectacle unfolding at the desk. They watched in fascinated silence as Diana fumbled awkwardly with her disorganized wallet, dropping loose receipts and assorted business cards onto the granite counter. The illusion of her elite prosperity shattered permanently into a million sharp pieces right before their eyes. The socialites exchanged knowing, silent glances, collectively removing Diana from their exclusive mental registry. Her social capital evaporated into the thin mountain air, leaving her entirely bankrupt in every conceivable metric. I observed the entire transaction from my elevated position on the mezzanine. I felt no triumphant joy, no soaring sense of vindictive victory. There was no dramatic musical crescendo echoing through my mind. There was only the quiet, steady hum of my business, operating exactly as it should. The rigid boundaries I established were functioning flawlessly, protecting my hard-earned empire from toxic parasites. I was a silent observer in a kingdom built entirely by my own labor, watching the final removal of a deeply persistent infection. Elena handed back the processed receipts, having successfully drained every single ounce of available credit my mother possessed. Diana and Lauren gathered their heavy bags and turned toward the grand exit doors. As they began their final trudge across the lobby, Diana suddenly stopped. She slowly raised her head, scanning the upper levels of the atrium until her eyes found mine. We stared at each other across the vast vertical distance. I looked for a single trace of genuine remorse, hoping perhaps the monumental humiliation had finally cracked her stubborn pride. There was absolutely no apology in her expression. There was only the fearful, hollow recognition of a supreme power she could no longer manipulate or control. She realized in that silent exchange that she had completely lost me. I was no longer a daughter she could command. I was a sovereign entity she deeply feared. I did not raise my hand to wave goodbye. I did not nod or acknowledge her presence in any physical manner. I simply held her gaze for 3 long seconds, finalizing the emotional severance before I turned away. I looked down at the digital tablet resting in my hands, checking the daily occupancy reports and reviewing the incoming catering schedules for the afternoon. I returned my focus entirely to my work. The violent emotional storm that had threatened to destroy my peace had officially passed, and my massive house still stood strong against the mountain wind. Down below, my fractured family pushed through the heavy glass doors and stumbled out into the freezing morning air. They dragged their luggage toward their parked vehicle, entirely unaware that their departure was merely a temporary illusion of escape. The front entrance was currently occupied by 2 unmarked government vehicles. The local police officers I had observed arriving earlier from my penthouse window were now standing patiently beside the valet podium, accompanied by a senior federal investigator holding a thick manila folder. The investigator stepped forward, intercepting Diana before she could reach the door handle of her car. He identified himself clearly, producing a formal warrant detailing the illegal wire transfers connected to the offshore accounts of my sister and her former fiancé. The ultimate consequence of her greed had finally arrived to collect its debt. Diana dropped her expensive leather bag onto the snowy pavement, the heavy thud mirroring the total collapse of her carefully constructed reality. The authorities informed her that she was being formally detained for questioning regarding international financial fraud. The justice system demands absolute accountability, stripping away all superficial titles and country club memberships until only the cold, undeniable truth remains. I walked toward my executive office, ready to conquer the day, completely satisfied that the ledger was finally balanced forever. 6 months have passed since that chaotic morning in the grand atrium. The vibrant green foliage of the summer season has gradually surrendered to the crisp golden hues of autumn across the Rocky Mountain ridges. The air outside my penthouse window carries a sharp chill that signals the approaching winter, but inside my executive suite, the atmosphere remains incredibly warm and perfectly still. The resort is thriving beyond my most ambitious projections. We recently secured a highly coveted International Hospitality Award, and our luxury suites are entirely fully booked for the upcoming holiday rush. Yet the most significant achievement of the past half year has absolutely nothing to do with corporate revenue or rising occupancy rates. My greatest triumph is the profound, unbroken silence that now fills my personal life. For the first time in 29 years, I wake up every single morning without a heavy knot of anxiety resting in my chest. The perpetual obligation to serve as a convenient human shield for other people and their terrible decisions has completely evaporated. The immense psychological weight of managing the fragile egos of my relatives no longer dictates my daily schedule. I have discovered the magnificent serenity that accompanies a quiet, unpurchased existence. There are no frantic phone calls demanding emergency bailouts. There are no condescending remarks disguised as maternal advice. There are no manufactured crises designed to drain my energy and my bank accounts. The emotional ledger is finally clean. The immediate aftermath of the federal arrests effectively shattered the toxic dynamic that held my relatives together. My sister and her criminal fiancé had their magnificent society wedding postponed indefinitely. Brad remains deeply entangled in a massive government investigation regarding his fraudulent investment schemes and illegal offshore accounts. His defense attorneys have already consumed whatever genuine capital he actually possessed. Without his fictional wealth to support her luxurious habits, Lauren was forced to confront the harsh reality of independent survival for the very first time in her pampered existence. She could no longer rely on my quiet subsidies or her partner and his stolen money. I recently learned through a mutual acquaintance that she secured a modest administrative position at a suburban dental clinic. She spends her days answering telephones and scheduling routine appointments, entirely stripped of the aristocratic superiority she once weaponized against me. My mother resides in a significantly smaller and much quieter reality today. Following the disastrous revelations concerning the embezzled medical trust and her subsequent entanglement in the financial investigation, her carefully curated social kingdom collapsed entirely. The wealthy women she desperately tried to impress instantly severed all contact to protect their own pristine reputations. The country club quietly revoked her membership privileges due to unpaid dues and the overwhelming scandal surrounding her detained son-in-law. Furthermore, since she could no longer afford the property taxes and I explicitly refused to renew her heavily subsidized residential arrangement, Diana had to vacate our sprawling childhood estate. She now rents a small two-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of Denver. Her days of commanding elite service staff and parading through high society galas are permanently finished. She is learning how to navigate the mundane struggles of the working class she always loudly despised. I am sitting at my reclaimed oak desk reviewing the preliminary revenue projections for the upcoming ski season when Marcus enters the penthouse suite. The stoic concierge manager carries a silver tray holding the daily stack of corporate correspondence. He places the assorted documents on the corner of my workspace, offers a polite nod, and retreats silently into the hallway. I sort through the various vendor contracts and promotional brochures until my hands stop on a single, remarkably plain item. It is a standard white business envelope. There is no return address printed in the upper corner. The postage stamp is slightly crooked, and my name is written across the center in a highly familiar, sharply angled cursive script. I stare at the handwritten ink for several long moments. A tiny flicker of ancient apprehension attempts to surface in my mind, remembering all the previous times a letter from my mother contained a fresh demand or a cruel manipulation. However, the newfound strength of my absolute autonomy quickly extinguishes that old fear. I pick up a heavy brass letter opener and smoothly slice through the paper fold. I do not find a multi-page document filled with desperate emotional pleas or tearful excuses. There is no elaborate narrative attempting to rewrite history or justify her terrible actions. There is only a single rectangular slip of secure banking paper resting inside the empty white sleeve. It is an official cashier check issued by a local community credit union. The amount printed across the secure background is exactly $500. I lower my gaze to the bottom left corner of the document where the brief memo line resides. The space contains just two simple words written in black ink. The note reads, Installment 1. I lean back in my high-backed leather chair and let the profound significance of this small piece of paper wash over me. There is no accompanying greeting card. There is no demand for a renewed relationship or a request for premature forgiveness. There is absolutely nothing but the cold, clean transaction of a formal debt being acknowledged. For the very first time in my entire existence, a boundary I established is being completely and unequivocally respected. My mother did not try to negotiate the terms. She did not attempt to weaponize guilt to escape the consequence of her theft. She simply went to a bank, secured the required funds, and mailed the precise penalty mandated by the legal contract she signed in the dining room 6 months ago. This solitary document represents the ultimate death of her entitlement. It proves that the iron fortress I built around my personal peace is completely impenetrable. I open the top drawer of my desk, retrieve my corporate endorsement stamp, and press it firmly against the back of the check. The crisp sound of the mechanical stamp echoes loudly in the quiet office. I will deposit these funds directly back into the secure medical trust she previously raided. I will repeat this exact administrative process every single month for the next decade until the ledger is entirely balanced. I will accept her money, but I will never again accept her toxicity. I stand up from my desk and walk toward the expansive glass wall overlooking the resort. The afternoon sun casts long, beautiful shadows across the snowy valleys. I look down at the guests enjoying the heated outdoor pools and the pristine hiking trails. I built this incredible sanctuary through relentless dedication and unwavering focus. I refuse to let the people who were supposed to love me tear it down. If they only respect your presence when they can actively spend your money, you must find the courage to show them the door. A quiet life built on absolute truth is worth far more than a loud seat at a crowded table that desperately wants you to remain invisible. You do not owe your success to the people who mocked your struggle. You do not owe your warmth to the people who constantly left you out in the cold. I turn away from the window and walk slowly out of the penthouse, heading toward the private elevator that leads directly to the subterranean mineral spa. I am going to spend the remainder of the evening floating in the heated saline water, entirely undisturbed by the chaos of the outside world. I am fully in control of my destiny, my environment, and my wealth. I am the undisputed master of my own ledger, and the balance is finally perfect.